Yeah, roll. Okay. Everybody all set?
Good.
Okay, this meeting, the Borough of Madison Zoning Board of Adjustment is now called to order. This is the regular virtual meeting of June 10, 2021. May I have an announcement of notice, please?
Let the minutes reflect that adequate notice of this meeting is provided in the following manner. The reorganization meeting of the board held on January 14th, 2021. The board by resolution adopted an annual schedule of meetings. On January 15th, 2021, a copy of the schedule of meetings was posted at the bulletin board at the main entrance of the Hartley Dodge Memorial, was sent to the Madison Eagle and the Daily Record, and filed with the borough clerk, all in accordance with the Open Public Meeting Act. In response to public safety considerations and legal authorization, the Board of Adjustment began conducting its monthly meetings remotely using the Zoom platform, and subsequently separate notices have been published each month advertising of this change and indicating that the procedures and requirements for monitoring such meetings and for making public comment, along with an explanation of the audio muting function of the electronic communications platform being utilized, is provided with detailed information on how to use Zoom and participate, found on the RoseNet webpage.
And Fran, I believe the annual meeting notice included the Zoom information, didn't it? I can't remember.
Yes, it did.
So, you know, we don't, since then, I don't think we've noticed every month. We don't have to if we do it in the annual.
Correct.
When and if we go back to live meetings, we'll have to adopt a new resolution establishing that for the rest of the year. Okay.
Correct.
Sure, we're straight on that.
Okay, perfect. May I get a roll call, please?
Mr. Dianio?
Here.
Ms. Driscoll?
Here.
Mr. Fitzsimmons?
Here.
Ms. Kaar?
Here.
Dr. Patel?
Here.
Ms. Salco?
Here.
Mr. Santoro?
Here.
Mr. Foster?
Here.
Ms. Teratelli?
Here.
All right, perfect. Do you have the flag? Okay, thank you, Fran. All right, would you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America,
and to the
To the
republic,
republic for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation, under
under
God,
God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very nice. Okay. First up is minutes for approval, and these are the minutes for the regular meeting of May 13, 2021. Anybody have any comments on that?
I did not know.
Fine. All in favor of these minutes as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, these minutes are approved. Okay, quickly, we have a number of resolutions. We were quite busy at the last meeting, so let's do it. Case number Z21-006, resolution granting variance application of Ben and Jamie Seeley, block 4601, lot 61-8, Old Greenhouse Lane.
The chairman picked up one typo on this on paragraph 7, fourth line. Extend to the rear. The has an extra word in it, letter in it. So that'll be corrected.
Oh, were there anything else? Any other items on that?
Not for
Okay.
me, no.
Okay, good. So all in favor of this resolution with the change discussed, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, this resolution is adopted. Next is case number Z21-011, resolution granting variance application of Matt and Jen Sandberg, block 3802, lot 45-104, Pomeroy Road. That one looked okay to me.
Yep. Looked okay to me too.
Okay, all in favor of this resolution is presented, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, this resolution is adopted. Next is case number Z21-012, resolution granting variance application of Gian Piolela, block 3403, lot 51, 152 Luanaca Way.
Yeah, one quick comment on this. People may recall on this one, this is one on the corner lot on Woodland and Luanaca. There was discussion, the applicants were putting a fence, a perimeter fence. And we agreed, they understood that along the front lines, it could only be 4 feet high and I guess semi-open. Question was whether there's a site triangle corner where it would have to go down to 2.5 feet. Mr. Harrington went out and took a look afterwards and confirmed that the property line is, because of the corners cut off that lot, so to speak. So the property line doesn't really go in the site triangle. So they could have a 4-foot semi-open fence around the full perimeter. Is that correct, Dennis?
That is correct, Mr. Hall.
Okay.
It's what we call a very large radius curb line on that intersection at Woodland and Lewanika. And the site triangle is measured at 25 feet back from the projection of the intersection of the curbs lines, and it did not impact the location of the fence. So the fence as proposed is not in the site triangle.
Right, and thus it didn't require variance. It was just, it will conform completely. So, okay, I just want to make sure people understood that wrinkle.
Right.
And great example of having Mr. Harrington on the board attend these meetings is a great way to get a better outcome for the public. So appreciate the extra effort you did on that. So all in favor of this resolution as presented? Please say
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, this resolution is adopted. Next is case number Z21-013, resolution granting variance application for Schlack Lot 506, Lot 3114, Oxford Lane. That one looked okay to me. Anybody find anything on that?
Looked okay to me too.
Okay, all in favor of this resolution as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, this resolution is adopted. Next is, believe it or not, the fifth one. Case number Z21-015, resolution granting variance application to Stephen F. Krochuk, block 3803, lot 46, 7 Belmont Avenue. That looked okay.
I had one typo I found on page 2, paragraph 14. The second line, I think enhanced should have a D on the end of it.
Yes, correct.
Okay,
I also had a question. We don't refer here to the fact that there was an earlier variance granted with respect to the size, the footprint of the garage, although the specs of the garage are given here as being larger than the maximum would otherwise be allowed. And I wondered if we should mention in this resolution the fact that the garage had been permitted under a prior variance.
Yeah, we had that in the file. I thought about that. Yeah, I guess we can put in paragraph 3, which cites the footprint.
I think that's a good idea because it's really an outsized garage, and the fact that the board on the prior board approved, that's a good idea to have that in there.
Yeah, I think you can just put that in as a parenthetical in paragraph 3, Gary, as permitted by prior resolution.
Prior variance of whatever.
Yeah.
There's a copy in the file, and so I'll just cite the date, and then that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. That's helpful.
Anything else?
Not for me.
Okay, all in favor of this resolution as presented with the change discussed, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, this
And
resolution.
Gary, just so that you know, Ms. Kaar would need to abstain from all resolutions. She was not present at the hearing.
Yeah, I just put whoever's listed on the resolution, that's who I count.
Okay, the
And
resolution.
as noted on this one, Diane and Mary Sue both recused on this one. I forgot why, but
Close to the Housing Authority property.
okay, but whatever, it's listed that way.
Mary Sue lives over there. So anyway, this resolution is adopted. Okay, next is scheduling and procedural matters. 83 Pomeroy Road, they had a noticing issue, I believe, and they're now for July 8th. And, did you want to mention the procedural matter, Gary, about if we get comments by the board?
Well, let's see, let's back up for a minute. Which one was July, you said? I'm looking at the agenda.
It's going to be 83 Pomeroy, case 19.
Okay.
I went there, I visited, the owner came out and said that they did.
Oh, I see, trap, yeah, okay.
Yeah, didn't notice properly, so,
So that'll be July, okay, we can note that.
yeah, July 8th. They're aware of
And I
that.
guess we have Donato, Huber, Friedel, and Lou. I guess the question is, can we assume we're not going to hear them tonight, or do we want to wait?
Let's wait.
Okay. I guess Donato, okay, no, they're all potentially could be heard tonight. I guess the other thing we've internally talked about was whether to at a meeting prior to the July 8 meeting to deal with business. I guess, Fran, how many new ones do we have that are not yet on the agenda that potentially would want to be heard in July?
2 new ones and the 1 carryover, so thus far 3.
Okay, and that's,
And the cutoff would be next week.
okay, so,
Well, why don't we schedule something, and if we use it, we do, if we don't.
yeah, we don't have to do it, you're right. And I mean, if we schedule something, it would only be for ones that have noticed for that, so nothing new could go on there. And if we're carrying trap to July, it would just be the 3 that may or may not get heard tonight. So it could be a short meeting.
Yeah, well, if we have the option, that's a good thing at this point. So is everybody, what dates could we do?
Normally we'd pick the 4th Thursday, which would be, I don't have that number.
June 24th.
I can't do that one, unfortunately. It'd have to be a different date, like a Monday or something like that. My wife's birthday, that would be the end of me.
I guess, Fran, I asked you this before and I never remember the answer. Do Zoom meetings conflict with court meetings? They have their own system, don't they?
No, I think everything's been handled by Michael, but I'm not really sure.
Okay, so we're not sure then.
I do know that Mayor and Council has Zoom meetings June 21st. I'm sorry, the 14th and the 28th.
Wasn't there, well,
I mean,
I guess we do a first Thursday, right? They usually used to be open. Which would that be the 1st?
that is correct,
Yeah.
July 1st.
I don't know
Okay,
if people are going
I mean,
away or otherwise. What was the Monday? There are a couple Mondays, but I have a 4th Monday meeting, so that doesn't work. Was it first Monday? That's a holiday, so that doesn't work either.
What about the 21st?
that's a Mayor and Council,
All
no.
right, right.
Well, we couldn't do it on that date?
I mean, I believe that they use a Zoom system.
Fran, I
And
thought you
if
said
there's
there were
The
14 and
14th and
28.
the 28th. I mean, I have to check with Michael. I don't know offhand, we could schedule it, but I don't know if that will come to fruition. I will need to check with Michael tomorrow.
Okay, what date is that?
The 21st, June 21st.
Okay,
That's the 3rd Monday. But Gary, are you available?
Yeah, no, I have a 4th Monday. That's my conflict scheduling wise. I could do the 3rd Monday.
so that's the 21st. Okay, let's do that, and then we'll move on, and if we can't use it, we won't use it. Okay, so all in favor of us scheduling a special meeting for June 21st. We get a motion to do that?
So
Yeah,
moved.
oral motion's fine.
Second?
Second.
All right, all in favor of establishing a special meeting for June 21st, 2021, please say aye.
Aye.
I
Okay,
assume that will be 7:30, the usual time.
correct, 7:30 usual time,
Okay,
for our meeting, 7:30 on July 21st.
June 21st.
Joe, I'm sorry, I just realized the 21st, I can't make it though. But I mean, if we have a full quorum, I'm sure we'll be fine.
Okay, thank you, that's noted. Okay, any other procedural matters, Gary?
No, I think that's it for the moment. Yeah, I think that's it. And well, I guess the question is whether you want to, now that we've scheduled that, carry the 3 residentials to that date or wait and see.
Wait a little bit.
Okay, that's fine.
Now, do you want to mention, before we jump into Madison movie, that if somebody's going to make a statement that they're going to need to appear in case the public is preparing, just want to get that out there or not?
Yeah, well, I said that, I think I've said that before, and I don't know if Michael's joined us or not. I think he may have to perform that function. That would only be at the end of the
Right.
last step in the process, so I think it's fair to say we won't get there tonight.
Okay, I just wanted it out there. So,
But going forward, yes. I mean, it is the regulations say that, questions, we don't have to see it. People can dial in, and people have been doing that sometimes. But the regulations adopted by the local government services said that if public comment, which should be sworn probably, and usually often is, needs to be in person. The person has to appear so you can see the person making the comment. So
okay, good. I just wanted
that's
to.
for future reference, just a heads up to people.
Okay, good. All right, so why don't we go to old business then? So this is Madison Movie Development LLC, 13 Lincoln Place. And by my recollection, we were going to ask Mr. Simon to cross-examine the applicant's planner. Is that right?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Peter Wolfson for the applicant of Dave Pitney, and that's exactly right. We were complete with our direct case. The public had questioned Mr. Phillips, as well as I believe the board. Mr. Simon was unavailable, or Mr. Phillips was unavailable at that meeting, so Mr. Simon was going to lead off with that.
Excuse me, Fran, you're gonna have to take me off the panel.
Okay, so Fran and has Helen moved already?
Yeah.
Okay. So Helen,
Hopefully they both can still monitor because they're curious. But they're not participating. Okay.
okay, so Mr. Simon, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Santoro. Always good to be here. So, Paul, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, great. And I'm going to assume that the rest of the board and public can hear me as well. And if somebody needs to ask me to speak up, please do so. Mr. Phil, and by the way, I'm going to probably slip between Paul and Mr. Phillips. I assume Mr. Phillips, if that's okay.
That's fine by me.
Okay. You're aware that not only has a demolition permit been issued for the movie theater building, but that the demolition of the structure, my understanding is, has recently taken place. Are you aware of that?
As a matter of fact, I passed the site yesterday and the demolition was well underway, appeared to be nearing completion.
So as the building has already been removed by the owner, that is, of course, irrespective of whether this application and all the relief required for this application is approved or denied, correct?
Can you repeat that question?
Sure.
Bob?
So now that the building is removed, that the board still has to make a decision as to whether this application and all of its variances, waivers, exceptions, et cetera, and site plan approval are approved or denied, right?
Yes.
So and as a now vacant property, one could construct a building that would be fully compliant with all bulk and design requirements of the CBD1 zone, correct?
In theory, yes.
And that would include lot coverage, rear yard setback requirements, correct?
In theory, yes.
And you would even be able to meet applicable parking requirements, especially if you made the building smaller than what's being proposed, correct?
That's a little trickier because you have some issues, in my opinion, with the site in terms of it being narrow. I think it's like 70 feet in width. It would be much more difficult within that width to basically to do parking on that site, essentially, if you were to meet all the bulk standards, including the parking.
Right. And but for commercial uses, though, that there's no parking requirement, correct?
In this zone, that's correct.
Right. And you talked, Paul, about the lot width of what'd you say, 70 feet? I'm sorry.
It's roughly, and I'm kind of rounding, Rob, but it's
Yeah, that's
roughly
right.
about 70 feet.
Okay. And what's the minimum lot width in the CBD1 zone?
I don't recall. We did need relief. I'd have to go back to the table. I don't recall as I sit here.
Right, but just so we're clear, the applicant does not need relief for the minimum lot width requirement in the CBD1 zone, correct?
Correct. That's correct.
And the lot not only complies with the lot width standard, but also complies with the minimum required frontage and depth standard for the CBD1 zone, correct?
I'd have to go back, but I know we don't need relief. So assuming that those standards are in effect, then that would be an accurate statement.
And your understanding, Paul, is that the applicant is seeking both preliminary and final site plan approval as part of this application, including for the use of the first floor space, correct?
Yes.
And given that the applicant is also seeking approval for final site plan approval, what are the particular stores proposed for the first floor space?
What are the particular stores?
Yeah, what are the particular retail stores that are being proposed?
As I understand it, and the testimony's been, there are no tenants at this point.
So by virtue of the applicant being granted final site plan approval for this application, would that then allow, from your understanding as the professional planner on the project, allow any retail to go in there without further review by any board?
I think the representation was that there would be up to 2 potential tenants within the space. Either it would be 1 space or 2 spaces. I see no roadblocks as to why that couldn't be approved by this board, and whatever other approvals might be necessary at time of C of O, which I'm not sure, then that would have to be dealt with at the time the tenant fit up and so forth were to occur.
So it's possible that the tenant makeup, fit up, identity, and the number of spaces, whether it's 1 or 2, may be determined outside of a final site plan review process by this board, correct?
That's my opinion, yes.
And with regard to the application that has been filed, is it your understanding that preliminary and final site plan approval is also required for lots 11, 22, 23, to the extent that improvements are made or uses are changing with regard to those lots?
My understanding is those 3 lots, 11, 22, and 23, are part and parcel of this application, and the application is for preliminary and final on all of the lots, at least as I understand it, Rob.
And you understand that this property is located currently within the Madison Civic Commercial Historic District, correct?
Yes,
And that remains the case, notwithstanding what happened to the building, right?
unless those boundary lines are changed, I would agree.
And you're familiar, I'm sure, with the application materials that are on file in connection with this application, correct?
I can't say that I've read every one of them, but I'm generally familiar with them, yes.
Are you generally familiar with the HPC memo of January 26, 2021?
I've read it, but it's not something that I've spent a lot of time with regard to, because we basically have the applicant has an architect that is much more familiar with those issues, so I didn't spend a lot of time with it.
Has the to your knowledge, as the planner on the project, Paul, has the applicant returned to the HPC in connection with this application since that memo of January 26, 2021?
I'm sorry, has the applicant?
Has the applicant returned to the HPC before that committee in connection with this application subsequent to January 26, 2021?
I don't know I don't believe so, but I don't know that as a fact.
Do you know whether, so my reading of the ordinance is that even after a certificate of historic review is issued, that the HPC would have to issue an amended certificate of historic review when there's changes to the building, which happened in this case. So do you know whether an amended certificate of historic review is going to be applied for, pursued, et cetera, by the applicant in connection with this application?
I don't know.
Recording in progress.
And we okay? And you don't, because even though this property is located within the historic district, are you familiar with, I guess, benefits associated with that designation, including overnight parking permits to residential units within the historic district?
I'm not familiar with that, no.
And you're aware, and I believe Mr. Hall asked you about this toward the end of the last time when you testified, that this project includes an affordable housing component, correct?
Yes.
And according to the ordinance, at least 20% of all the dwelling units shall be affordable, and that any fractional affordable housing requirement of 0.5 units or higher shall be rounded up to the nearest whole number. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware that the current ordinance has a 20% set aside, but this application basically was submitted under the time of application rule.
When you say it was submitted under the time of application rule, which I'm guessing what you're referring to, what are you specifically referring to? In other words, what date and what ordinance are you referencing?
I don't know the dates or the citation of the ordinance per se, but I know this application went in a long time ago and was deemed complete a long time ago. And my understanding is that took place prior to the ordinance, which established the 20% set aside.
And when you say this application went in a long time ago and was deemed complete a long time ago, what dates are you referring to?
I don't recall the dates. I've been involved in this project for 4 years, Rob. I don't recall the dates.
Okay. And when you're referencing this application being submitted a long time ago and being deemed complete a long time ago, was that an application that was made to the Board of Adjustment or the Planning Board?
So I'm referring to this particular application before the zoning board.
So, but you don't know when the application was deemed complete, right?
I really don't.
Okay, that's fine. And so your position, though, is that at the time that this application before the Board of Adjustment was deemed complete, that the ordinance requirement was not at least 20% of all the dwelling units to be affordable, right?
My understanding is that when this application was deemed complete, the ordinance in place did not require 20%. And again, I don't remember the dates.
Do you remember, so it required less than 20%?
Yes.
Okay. And that was what, 15%?
Yes.
And this project is not part of any, housing element and fair share plan or any settlement with Fair Share Housing Center, correct?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And you're certainly familiar with the principal permitted uses for the CBD1 zone, correct?
Yes.
And I noticed that, and you mentioned the architect, I noticed in some of the renderings that were submitted to this board Board of Adjustment in connection with the application, that it referenced a restaurant use on the first floor. Are you aware, first of all, whether a restaurant use is potentially contemplated for this first floor use, especially given your answer to my question about final site plan a little bit ago?
My understanding is that the applicant does not have a tenant or tenants yet for the retail commercial space.
Do you believe, as a professional planner on this project, that apartments are permitted over restaurants in the CBD 1 zone?
I do.
And what are you basing that on, Mr. Phillips?
I think the language is in the ordinance is that it's permitted over, I think it's retail and offices or
Yeah,
commercial.
it says, right, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, Paul, but just to refresh your recollection, that it actually states that a permitted use is apartments over quote unquote stores or offices. And does that refresh your recollection?
It's yes.
And there's a separate principal permitted use for the CBD 1 zone of restaurants, non-drive-through, correct?
I take your word for it. I'd have to look to see how it's categorized in the permitted use list.
So your position is that where it says that principal permitted uses for the CBD 1 zone include apartments over stores or offices, you believe that restaurants fall under the definition of stores or offices?
I don't know how the zoning officer in Madison would interpret residential over a restaurant per se, meaning whether or not that falls under the generic category of a store. But again, my understanding here is that there's no tenant for that space at this point. So we don't know whether it's a retail store or whether a restaurant is contemplated.
But as a professional planner on the project, your professional opinion is that a restaurant could be on the ground floor with apartments above in the CBD?
Depending upon how it's interpreted by the zoning officer, I think it's conceivable.
Well, I'm asking you, Mr. Phillips, in your professional opinion, based on your sworn testimony, what is your opinion on it?
I'm saying that, again, it depends on whether or not you would interpret restaurant to fall within the umbrella of the store. I think that that's not a stretch to take that position. But again, that'll be determined at the time a tenant comes in as to whether or not it's permitted.
Okay. You're aware, of course, that the land use plan element of the master plan was updated in 2020, correct?
I'm aware of that.
And the land use plan element of the 2020 master plan does not recommend apartments on the ground floor in the CBD 1 zone, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, the 2020 master plan includes what is identified as a conceptual vision plan, correct?
I don't recall the categorization. I read the document.
Do you recall that the conceptual vision plan in the 2020 master plan identifies the subject property, lot 24, as part of the retail core?
I don't recall. I'll take your word for it.
And do you recall that the conceptual vision plan in the 2020 master plan also identifies a quote unquote downtown living area, which was delineated as located blocks away from not only the train station, but also lot 24?
Again, I read the document. I take your word for it. As I sit here, I don't recall that in particular.
And Mr. Phillips, what's the maximum density in Madison for any zone that permits residential units?
I don't know that as I sit here.
If I told you that none of the borough's zoning districts express a permitted density above 30 units per acre. Would that refresh your recollection at all?
No, it wouldn't.
And if I told you that the zones that do permit multifamily housing are at a limit of 20 units per acre or below, does that refresh your recollection?
Again, I didn't study the densities of residential densities in other zones as
And-
part of this application.
Yeah, that's fair. The proposed project with 24 units on a little over a quarter of an acre equates to a density of 90.2 units per acre, correct?
Your math sounds accurate, but again, I've not independently attempted to verify the density.
And you then have not analyzed or compared that density, that 90.2 units per acre, with zones, the permitted density in zones that actually permit multifamily use as a permitted principal use, correct?
It wasn't relevant, in my opinion, to this application of this analysis, because the underlying zone basically permits above ground floor apartments within the envelope. So to me, it's not a relevant, apples to apples comparison to look at another zone that may basically put a limit on density.
But for this project, you're going outside the envelope, isn't that correct?
We are seeking a rear yard setback. That's correct.
Right. And then also for this application, you are proposing residential housing units on the first floor that are not permitted under the zoning ordinance, correct?
That's why we're here.
And do you know, Mr. Phillips, how many stores on Lincoln Place have residential units above retail or offices?
I do not. I didn't inventory that. Many of the buildings along Lincoln Place are only a single story along the frontage. They do, because of the grade, there are 2 stories in the rear of some of the buildings. And I think there's one 3-story building closer to Waverly with, I don't know if it's residential or offices above. I don't know.
Right, but even for that building, Paul, that's near or on the corner of Waverly, you did not do any type of analysis as to how many units are in those buildings, correct?
That is correct.
So therefore, then you can't opine as, what the effective density per acre is of those buildings, correct?
Again, it wasn't particularly relevant to my analysis, as I've stated previously.
Right, and with regard to the information and exhibits that were provided by the project's architect, who you mentioned earlier, in the application materials, he included exhibits to evidence apartments over stores. Is that accurate? Do you recall that?
I recall that he had exhibits, but my recollection is the principal focus was on the heights of buildings in the downtown area. He may have done that. I don't recall.
Right, but as the professional planner on the project, you have not done any type of analysis to distinguish of those identified properties, which ones were in the CBD1 zone versus the CB2 zone, for example, correct?
I did not.
And similar to your answers before, and I want to keep repeating myself, you didn't perform any type of analysis as to the effective density of per acre, of any of those buildings, whether they were located in the CBD1 zone, CBD2 zone, historic district. You just didn't look at any of that, correct?
I did not.
And Paul, what's the square footage of the proposed building?
I don't recall off the top of my head.
And can you estimate based on your knowledge of the project?
Not without basically looking at the plans and doing some math. I mean, it's roughly 70 feet wide. The 130 feet deep, and you can multiply that by 3 stories. That'll get you the square footage.
Plus the mezzanines, right?
Well, that's that. I'm not quite
I'm not
sure
asking in
that
terms of stories. I'm
that's
just
floor
talking in
area or
terms-
not, but that
No,
remains to be seen.
Well, but in terms of square footage, right?
If you count the mezzanine space at roughly whatever it is, slightly over 100 square feet, in terms of what would be attributable to that unit, yes.
Now, the proposed building that is on a lot 70 feet wide and 130 feet deep, with little, if any, setback to the front, back, or sides. Is it fair to say that this building will have the largest square footage of all the buildings on Lincoln Place in this block?
Again, I didn't do an analysis, but to corroborate that or not, but it may well be, but again, I didn't do an analysis.
Okay, so, but you're familiar certainly with the neighborhood, and you've been to the site a number of times, right?
On multiple occasions.
Right. So in your multiple occasions in looking at the block and being familiar with it, can you estimate by what margin will the proposed building be larger than any of the other buildings on the block?
I have no idea. Again, I didn't undertake that analysis.
And so you also did not perform any analysis with regard to the floor area ratio of the proposed building / site compared to the FAR calculations of any building property along Lincoln Place, correct?
Correct.
And the same answer holds in terms of your failure to analyze size or FAR of buildings in the CBD1 zone, correct?
I'm not sure I understand that
Sure, I'll
question. No,
rephrase the
I
question.
didn't do an analysis of every building in the CBD1 zone.
Did you do an analysis of any building in the CBD1 zone other than the proposed building on lot 24?
I didn't do a detailed analysis of other lots in terms of compliance with zone standards, but I certainly spent time walking throughout the entire CBD. I looked at aerial photographs and tax maps of the CBD, but I didn't do any detailed analysis in terms of zoning compliance of other lots.
So, but in terms of the CBD1 zone where this property is located, did you, in your studies and you're looking at the aerials and walking the neighborhood, did you make any observation as to the size of the proposed building in its relation to the size of the lot as compared to other buildings in the CBD1 zone?
What I did in terms of comparing to other buildings wasn't necessarily the size per se, but I wanted to see if there were examples of other buildings in the CBD1 district, where basically you had a building that covered the largest portion, if not the entire lot. And there were indeed examples of that.
And where were they?
There's a number of them throughout the CBD1 district.
And a number of them that what?
That either covered the largest portion of the lot or covered what appeared to be the entirety of the lot based on inspection of aerials and tax maps.
And how many stories were those buildings?
Again, I wasn't focused on the number of stories when I undertook that investigation.
And when you,
Some may have been one, some may have been two. There are examples of 4-story buildings in the CBD. It wasn't critical to me. What was critical to me was to see if there were examples of other buildings in the downtown that were essentially property line or street wall type buildings.
and of the buildings that you identify, whether they were 1-story or 2-story and taking up most of the lot, did you do any type of analysis as to whether those buildings were constructed prior to zone changes that would make them non-conforming?
No.
And with regard to getting back to the subject property, and by the way, let me continue. I'm a little dark, and the reason why I'm a little dark here is that I just lost power in my house. So I am operating under battery power, do the best I can. When you have a face for radio, it's not so horrible to the people who are observing. So getting back to my questioning, Paul. So I apologize, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, if I appear dark, but that is the reason for it. In this case, Mr. Phillips, the percentage of the total square footage devoted to retail on this property or for this building is how much?
I didn't do that calculation.
Okay. I did the calculation. I came up with approximately 6%. Does that sound about right?
I have no reason to dispute your calculation.
Right. And you've been, of course, Paul, involved in a number of mixed-use projects over the years, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you ever recall one that's was across the street from a train station next door to the post office that functionally had 3 floors, where only 6% of the total floor area was retail and 94% was residential?
I don't know, because I've never done those type of calculations in connection with those projects.
And in this case, you have the first 30 feet of depth from the sidewalk devoted to retail, whether it's one building or 2, with the balance, or approximately 104 feet devoted to residential, correct? This is just for the first floor.
I think you mean one space or tenant, not building, I think.
What's that?
You said
No,
one
well, no,
building
no,
or 2. I think
I'm
you
sorry,
meant the
of
tenant
depth.
space.
Of depth,
Okay,
the depth of the building.
right.
Right.
And I don't know what the other reference to the other number, I'm not quite sure what that was.
Well,
You said the 30 feet and then you said another number, which I
right.
was
So
unsure.
from the sidewalk, the first 30 feet of depth from that sidewalk, building wise, is devoted to the retail space, right? And then
Yes.
the rest of it's devoted to the residential space,
That's correct.
right? So is it fair to say that approximately, again, this is my calculation, that 22% of the first floor is devoted to retail and 78% is devoted to residential, right?
Again, I have no reason to dispute your figures.
Okay. And do you know how many ground floor spaces of a mixed-use building in the CBD1 zone have 25% or less space devoted to retail or office use is being proposed here?
Again, I don't know, because I've not done that analysis.
Okay, but you did, Paul, last time, I believe, when you were questioned, and I think it was actually even questioned by Mr. Stern, that you did perform a survey of some spaces in the downtown, correct?
I did.
Right? And then you did that in terms of depth, right?
Well, I try to get a sense as to what the square footage of the space was, but also looking at the depth and the width.
And when you looked at those spaces that you testified about, were they all retail spaces or were some of them restaurant spaces?
They were both.
And how many, I mean, what percentage, it's hard for me to ask this, what percentage were restaurants and what percentage were retail?
I have no idea. I didn't undertake that analysis.
And you didn't record any of that information?
No.
And were those spaces located exclusively in the CBD1 zone or were some also located in the CBD2 zone?
I focused on CBD1.
And in terms of those properties that were in the CBD1 zone, were any of those properties located in the historic district?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
Okay, but you can't tell me as we're sitting here today, me in the dark, which ones were in the historic district and which
No,
ones
I
weren't.
did, when I did the analysis, I just focused on CBD1. I did not focus on the historic overlay portion.
And did you, when you looked at those space sizes, Paul, did you also notice or identify the lot sizes of those properties?
I took note of the lot sizes. I also took note of the building sizes, but I didn't do, specific calculations.
All right, when you said you took note of the lot sizes, what were the lot sizes of those properties?
They varied.
Well, the ones where you said that, very few had, I guess you said between 30 and 40 feet of depth. For those that you did identify with between 30 and 40 feet of depth, what were the lot sizes of those properties?
I don't know. I focused more on the depth and the width of the building or storefront per se. Some of which appeared to basically, as I said earlier, take up the majority, if not all of the lot. In other instances, the lot was deeper and there might have been parking in the rear of the lot, for example.
Right. But you didn't specifically record any of that information though, right?
I was focusing on the depth and size of the storefront space, which was something that Mr. Stern had asked that we do.
I understand. With regard to the, and I apologize if I'm repeating myself, and I may be, but you didn't look at those lot depths in relation to the lot depths of the lots, correct?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's probably my fault, Paul. When you looked at those lot depths of those spaces, did you also notice their relation to the lot depths of the lots themselves?
Yeah, again, as I think at least I tried to answer, the focus in looking at the size of the retail space was on the building per se, as opposed to the building and the lot upon which it sat.
Right.
So the short answer is no.
Okay, and so you don't know how many violated the rear yard setback for the CBD1 zone like lot 24 does then, right?
No, other than, as I testified to, that clearly there were instances where there were buildings that took up, the majority, if not all of the lot. I did not do any further analysis.
So in this case, at least currently, you have two retail spaces. One is 988 square feet and one is 800 square feet, correct?
Yeah, roughly. One is roughly 800 and the other is just short of 1,000.
Right. Did you investigate the square footages of the first floor retail or office space for the buildings on Lincoln?
They were part of what I looked at in terms of the overall CBD1.
Were any of the retail or office spaces on the first floor on Lincoln have retail space sizes that were equal to or smaller than what is being proposed here?
Not that I can recall.
And there are many other lots in the CBD zones that have first floor commercial space greater than the 1,788 square feet total, correct?
Well, there are certainly examples of spaces that are larger than 1,800 square feet. In the CBD, there are some that aren't quite 1,800 square feet. It generally, again, mirrors the dimensions and particularly the frontage and the depth of the building.
Here we have 6 of the 24 proposed residential units on the first floor, correct?
That is correct.
And in looking at the plans, how many residential units are not directly above the proposed stores?
Again, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, so if I told you that 20 of the 24 units, residential units, are not above the stores proposed, does that sound accurate to you?
I have no reason to, to not believe you're not. It wasn't important in terms of my analysis, so I don't know. I mean, I take
Okay.
your word for it.
Right. And in terms of taking my word for it, if I told you, at least under my calculation, that roughly 78% of the building's usable floor area or volume is not over any store. Does that sound about right?
Again, I didn't do an analysis. I have no reason to dispute what your calculations are.
Okay. And Paul, you haven't done any type of analysis of the percentage of first floor retail or office vacancies pre-pandemic in the CBD1 zone, correct?
Nothing more than what I observed when I was doing the sort of informal survey of the spaces.
Okay, when you did the informal survey of the spaces, was that pre-pandemic?
I believe it was post-pandemic when I actually did that exercise.
So pre-pandemic, you have not looked at any reports or studies or surveys as to the percentage of first floor retail or office vacancies in the CBD1 zone, correct?
Correct.
And when you said you did your survey, your informal survey, I think you called it at the when you testified. When was that, Paul, approximately?
I believe it was sometime last year, but I don't remember the month.
And do you know currently, in terms of the CBD1 zone, the number of vacancies for first floor retail space?
I do not.
And are you aware of any studies that in the last 5 years, let's say, that address the demand or lack thereof for retail space in downtown Madison?
No.
Okay, so, and you don't know how commercial rents per square foot in downtown Madison compare to, let's say, Morristown, Maplewood or what the average is in Morris County, correct?
No.
And with regard to the, I guess, new first floor rental space, do you know how much brand new first floor rental space is currently available in the CBD1 zone in Madison?
Well, I think the answer is no, but I'm not quite sure what you mean by brand new.
Okay, that's my bad. Let's say in the last, constructed or renovated in the last 5 years.
Again, I have no idea.
And you wouldn't know for any of those spaces that have been constructed or renovated in the last 5 years what the size of those spaces are, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So is it fair to say that you have not studied the market demand for, let's say, 1,000 square feet and lower retail space in the CBD1 zone?
I've not done a specific analysis of market demand in the CBD1 zone in the Borough of Madison, no.
And you're not relying on any market studies or reports for your conclusions that you testified to that there's going to be more of an opportunity to lease these small spaces than offering the whole ground floor as retail, correct?
I'm relying on trends that I see in my profession throughout other areas in the state. I'm relying on the articles that I read on retail trends. I'm relying on the opinions of retail specialists in downtown areas that I've spoken with or heard in terms of what the trends are moving forward in terms of retail space in a downtown setting. And I think, as I said earlier during my testimony, I on this project, I'm looking forward rather than backwards.
And with regard to those, what you read, you haven't included any of those materials in your written planning report as part of this application, correct?
That's correct.
And you haven't provided that information to the board, right?
Not specifically, no.
And none of that information was specific to downtown Chatham or Madison, for example, correct?
Nothing was specific to downtown Madison, no.
And you haven't reviewed any studies or reports that state that retail space needs have decreased to less than 1,000 square feet, correct?
I think you've asked that question. You're talking about Madison specifically?
I'm talking about anywhere in Morris County.
Yes. Yeah, anywhere. That's one of the trends that I testified to during my direct testimony.
And where in Morris County did you read that trends are that retail space is decreasing to less than 1,000 square feet in a downtown across from a train station?
The articles weren't specific to Morris County. They were specific to downtown areas generally in terms of what are the trends. And the trends are shrinking retail, largely because of e-commerce. And this is even pre-COVID, and particular difficulty with regard to large retail spaces in a downtown context. And again, not just articles, not just what I've seen over the course of my practice, but in basically hearing this from experts in the field of retail leasing.
Did any of these studies refer specifically to downtown areas across the street from train stations?
Yes.
Okay. And where was that, Mr. Phillips?
Milburn.
And what did it say about Milburn across the street from the train station?
It basically said that the trends in Milburn in terms of the demands for retail space in the downtown are not dissimilar from retail areas that do not have a train station. Retail's shrinking, and that was clearly observed, and that was one of the observations with regard to the retail consultant who was involved in a downtown vision plan for Milburn. And in fact, one of the recommendations in that study was to shrink the retail core of the CBD, and in fact, to allow housing on the outer perimeters of the CBD because there wasn't enough demand in the future to support additional retail.
And this is for Milburn?
Yes, it was.
Right. And so in Milburn, are you aware of across the street from the train station there of retail spaces that are retail that are less than 1,000 square feet?
I've not done an exhaustive study of the sizes of the retailer storefront spaces in Milburn. What I can tell you about Milburn, I'm the township planner in Milburn, is their retail district, notwithstanding being Milburn and next to a train station, has been hurting. There are a lot of vacancies in downtown Milburn.
Let's move back to Madison for a moment. You didn't investigate when you talked about the grade change on this particular property. You didn't investigate whether there's other properties in the CBD1 zone that have similar 10-foot grade changes from front to back, correct?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm trying to resist the parade of objections as to relevancy and repetition, but the continuing exercise of going to other municipalities or asking about countywide issues and repeating the questions when they're asked and answered is really not productive. And I would ask that the board control Mr. Simon's questioning so that it's relevant and non-repetitive.
Well, I tend to agree, and I, unless Gary sees otherwise, I would like Mr. Simon, if you would kind of move things along a little bit and stay a little closer on point. I seem to glean from what some of these last questions of Mr. Phillips are, you're almost saying that our master plan is invalid, that it's wrong in terms of some of the things that Mr. Phillips agreed with, or he stated that he sees these trends, and these trends are sitting in our master plan, and it seems like you're calling that out. I don't know if that's
I
really
wouldn't.
valid. These are things we see as a board.
Well,
right?
I don't.
People who live here. So my point is, I'd like you to try and move it along a little bit. I also don't want to see it run out of power over there. Not
That may happen. I will move forward. That might be your lucky night. With Mr. Phillips, did you didn't investigate whether there's other properties in the CBD1 zone that have similar 10-foot grade changes from front to back?
Mr. Chairman, I object to that.
Why, Peter?
Well, if you don't interrupt, I will state the objection. The objection is it's irrelevant to the testimony as to this lot, both as it affected the support for the variance relative to any relief that's tied to the grade, as well as the support for the use variance, which was that Mr. Phillips felt that the first floor apartments really were not visible from the streetscape, which was an important planning consideration. And because of this precipitous slope on this one unique lot, were the equivalent of not being on first floor apartments.
But that's exactly the reason why I'm asking him the question, Mr. Wolfson. You just said it yourself. The fact that you believe that Mr. Phillips testified that this property is unique because of the grade change. And I want to ask him about the extent of the uniqueness. Thank you very much for the tee-up.
Well,
so I'd like to ask the question now.
The term of uniqueness goes to testimony relevant to use variances.
His testimony will speak for itself. He actually said that this property is suitable. One of the reasons why is because of the grade change. I want to ask him about that.
So if I can, shall I answer, or we kind of?
Why don't you go ahead and answer that?
Thank you. So based on my observations of the remainder of the downtown, and again, I can't speak for each and every property, but I would indicate that the condition here in terms of the drop in the topography from front to back on this is unique and extraordinary relative to the conditions that I've seen for the majority of other properties in the downtown.
You didn't do any topography studies though to determine actually what the grade changes are for other properties, correct?
I did not do any topographic analysis. It was done by visual observation.
Right. And then with regard to lot depths, you didn't do any analysis in terms of the depths of lots in the CBD1 zone generally, correct?
Other than, as I mentioned, I did look at tax maps as well as aerial photography, and it varies. There are lots that aren't very deep, that are lots that are deep. I would say that the subject lot is relatively deep. It's probably one of the deeper lots that I observed in the CBD1 district.
But you didn't actually look at that. You didn't do a study as to how many lots exceed 100 feet versus not, correct?
Already asked and answered, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I think you're getting repetitive, Rob. Try to move it along, please.
I'm trying to move it along.
No, you're not. No, you're not. You're asking the same question, and we're back to what the chairman said. It should be relevant and not repetitive. And of course, when you present your witness, your planner can testify to all the things you think should be done and whether he did it or not. Mr. Phillips testified, and try to focus on his testimony, not what you think he should have done, please.
How many other mixed-use buildings in the CBD1 zone, Mr. Phillips, have residential on the first floor?
I can't say that I could point to any per se, although I'll qualify that by saying that it was impossible for me to determine with 100% certainty, for example, whether the rear portion of some of the ground floor buildings, what they were used for. So with that caveat, that is my answer.
And how many four-story buildings are currently within the CBD1 zone?
They are clearly the exception as opposed to the rule, but there is, I did notice that there was at least one, if not two, four-story buildings in the downtown.
And when you say, Paul, in the downtown, were they actually in the CBD1 zone, or you're not sure?
They were in the CBD1 zone.
And how far away were they from the subject property?
One in particular, I think, was on Waverly Place, on the far side of Waverly Place, as I recall. So that's relatively close.
Okay, do you recall where the other one was?
I don't.
Now, did you do, in terms of the parking garage underneath the building, did you do, as a professional planner on the project, any analysis as to whether that constitutes a basement or a cellar under the ordinance?
I believe that, I mean, this was an issue that came up early on, and others on the team, including the engineer and the architect, looked at that. And I recall looking at the definition, but my recollection is that it qualified as not even a basement, a cellar, but it didn't qualify as a story.
But okay, just based on that discussion. Okay. Now, multifamily buildings are not permitted in the CBD1 zone, correct?
When you say multifamily buildings, you're talking about
residential,
exclusively multifamily.
Yes, sir. Sorry.
I think that's an accurate statement. Yes.
Now, so the current use of lots 11 and 12 are exclusively residential. Is that correct?
11 is residential, and I believe 12 is also residential. Yes.
So do they qualify as pre-existing non-conforming uses?
Again, I don't know the entirety of the history in terms of those uses relative to the date of the zoning ordinance, but it's probably a fair assumption that they are.
The lot 12 from what you understand, also has access and parks their vehicles on lot 11, correct?
I believe it's lot 10 that parks the vehicle on lot 11.
And what about lot 12? Where do they park their vehicles?
I don't know.
And lot 10 is what?
It's a lot that has frontage on Main Street.
That's the, what was it, British Emporium?
I think they refer to it as British Emporium, yes.
Right. But so you don't know where lot 12 I'd say residents, I apologize, park their vehicles at night, right?
No,
Do you know?
I didn't focus on lot 12, so no.
Okay, so do you know if lot 12 has easement rights across the subject driveway easement leading to Lincoln Place?
I don't recall one way or the other whether it does or not.
But certainly you would agree that lots 11, 22, 23, and 24 all have rights to the driveway easement on lots 23 and 24, right?
I believe that's accurate.
And you would also agree that the Madison ordinance requires an accessory use to be on the same lot as the principal use, right?
Like most ordinances, yes.
Right, and that also applies to the accessory build structures as well.
Typically, again, I didn't look at it in the Madison ordinance, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's what it said.
And so, and I think you sort of preempted me during your direct testimony, because I've raised this issue before as to the extent to which variances are required, use variances are required for the lots due to the fact of the driveway now being extended to lot 24 for the first time. And and plus separately, additional traffic on lot 23 driveway due to the new proposed use. Do you have an opinion on that?
I'm not sure what the question is.
The question is whether use variance relief is required for lots 11, 12, 22, or 23 due to the fact that they're now using lot 24 for a driveway.
Well, my understanding is that that driveway, which is being widened from its existing condition, but that driveway is now subject to an easement where multiple parties have rights, and that easement's been in place for quite some time. So I'm kind of not understanding. I guess I'm not understanding what your query is.
Sure, my query is, I think, pretty simple. The fact that that easement that's been in effect for a long time just covered lot 23, right? Because the driveway was only on lot 23. Isn't that accurate?
I'd have to double check that, but I'd have to double check whether a portion of the driveway, I know we're increasing the size of the driveway on the subject lot, lot 24. But I'd have to double check whether a portion of that driveway right now is also traversing lot 24.
And even if it was, it's certainly not traversing lot 24 as much as it is under the current proposal, right?
That's accurate.
So is the answer that you'd have to go back and check to see whether in fact use variance relief would be required in connection with either the widening of the driveway to include lot 24 and the additional use of the lot 23 and 24 driveway due to the new use that's being proposed on lot 24?
No, I wouldn't need to go back and check. I don't think a use variance is required because under the current proposal, as I understand it, a portion of the driveway will be on lot 24 and it will be serving lot 24. It's a shared driveway.
Does lots 22 and 23 need a use variance because now they're using lot 24 for the first time?
No.
Why?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that they're using lot 24 for the first time, number one. Again, the fact that there are other uses in the same zone that are permitted uses that are sharing a driveway, I don't know how that possibly would rise to a use variance. If those lots are basically sharing that driveway, I'm not quite sure how it would be a use variance.
Okay. And right now, you don't know how many commercial businesses or residential units will have access to and from that driveway easement adjacent to Lincoln Place if the application is approved, right?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. You don't know how many commercial businesses and residential units will have access to and or from the driveway easement adjacent to Lincoln Place if this application is approved, correct?
I'm not sure. You're talking about from the subject application?
words,
We can tell.
Yeah, I want to know how many, let me rephrase it, Paul, and I apologize. I may have gotten it wrong. How many different residential units and commercial businesses will have the legal right to use the driveway easement?
So it would be the proposed units and retail space on lot 24.
Right.
The existing big businesses on lot 22 and 23.
Yeah.
And the residences on lot 11, as I understand.
But and you don't know about lot 12, right?
I don't know about lot 12.
And if somebody were to enter British Emporium in that one way, going under the tunnel there from Main Street, and when they're done parking at British Emporium, they could continue on and go out on that easement also, right? Like, some patron to the business, correct?
You're saying if someone enters from Main Street through lot 10, there would be nothing that would prohibit them from basically doing that maneuver now.
Right. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at my battery. I have no further questions.
Okay, very good. All right, let's, Gary, and you can help me out if I get this wrong a little bit, but should we allow Mr. Wolfson the ability to rebut any of this or make comments at this point before we move to, sorry, you're muted.
It's called redirect if Mr. Wolfson chooses to.
I have a very few questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Among the many areas, Paul, that Mr. Simon explored with you, he asked about the fact that the demo has commenced and then asked you questions about whether a complying building could be built. The application that was submitted always anticipated demolition on this lot, right?
Correct.
And the fact that the demolition has commenced doesn't change anything, doesn't affect your testimony relative to the variances that are sought.
Correct.
He also asked about whether final approval, I think he was asking whether final approval was appropriate when tenants are not identified for the retail spaces. Of course, we don't have tenants identified for the residential either, but in your experience, have you testified in support of final approval for retail space when the tenant is not identified?
Yes.
In fact, is it common that a developer needs to have approval in order to market retail space?
Yes.
Mr. Simon also asked whether this project was part of the housing element or fair share plan for Madison. Does that matter in terms of Madison getting the benefit of these affordable units in its future compliance?
No, it does not.
Mr. Simon also asked you relative to the submission date for this application relative to the zoning ordinance change, which increased from 15% to 20%, the affordable requirement. Just for the record, and these application materials are, of course, available to the public. The application was filed on September 4th, supplemented by your planning report on September 9th. The ordinance was adopted on September 14th. And of course, the law is not whether we were deemed complete, but whether we submitted a complete application. Is that your understanding of the law relative to gaining the benefit of the prior ordinance?
Yes, it is.
He also asked you if you had looked at FAR requirements or FAR in existence in other buildings. Is there even an FAR requirement in the CBD district?
No.
He told you that he had calculated that 20 of the 24 apartments were not above the stores. When the ordinance talks about having apartments above the stores, is it talking physically, or is it talking from a planning perspective of having first floor stores and apartments on higher stories?
Can you repeat the question, Peter?
Mr. Simon told you he had calculated that 20 of the 24 apartment units were not located above the retail space. Is that relevant from a planning perspective to the ordinance policy, which calls for apartments on floors above first floor?
Yeah, I don't think it, in my opinion, I don't think that calculation is particularly relevant. The ordinance basically allows apartments over stores or offices. Here, I think we have a unique situation where we're able, because of the topography, to do a garage. And in fact, the bulk of the units are, if you want to break it down, are over both the garage as well as the retail portion. So with that fact pattern in place, again, I don't see the particular relevancy of the 20% or whatever calculation that Mr. Simon had done.
And finally, do you see any need to modify your testimony in support of relief that's sought in this application based on the questioning that Mr. Simon had of you?
No, I do not.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Wolfson, as I understand it, that concludes your affirmative case. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Hall. Subject to perhaps
Subject
rebuttal.
to rebuttal if you deem it. I agree that you have that right.
In a very, very brief closing.
Correct. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think then it's, you can turn the stage over to Mr. Simon if he chooses to present an objector testimony.
Yeah, I believe Mr.
I don't know,
Simon.
if you may want to take a break first. It's
Oh, it's
9
on.
o'clock. I'll
Okay,
defer
we're
to
gonna
you.
that's a good call. Thank you very much for pointing that out. We're gonna take a 5-minute break, so we'll come back. It's 9 o'clock, 9:05. So, video and mute. Okay, guys, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Hi, we're back now. Is everybody here? Well, just make sure everybody dials in here. Give it 1 second. We've got Anthony and Mary Sue. Just want to make sure everybody's back before we start.
Mr. Chairman, can Fran bring in my planner into the,
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's do that. Who is that?
Michael Pesolano? Thank you.
Okay, so we're back in session now. Okay, so I think we're at the point where Mr. Simon, you would present, if you want to, your planner.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I see Michael Pesolano's is with us, and I'd like him to be sworn in, please.
Yeah, I will do that. Mr. Pesolano, do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did
Everyone.
did Mr. Pesolano, did he provide any kind of report ahead of time?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
So Mr. Pesolano, why don't you provide your name? You've given us your name, your address, affiliation, licenses, and experience in the field as a professional planner, please.
Sure. I'm Michael J. Pesolano, principal and founder of MJP Land Use Planning, LLC, office at 140 Elmwood Avenue, Pagoda, New Jersey. Originally licensed as professional planner in 1984, practicing professional planning ever since as a licensed planner, even a few years before the licensing as an assistant planner. Like my esteemed colleague, Mr. Phillips, I did get a Master of Urban Planning degree from Hunter College. And that was just prior to my licensing. 40 years later, roughly, I find myself before boards such as this, almost nightly, testifying on behalf of applicants and objectors in development applications. Earlier in my career, I served more on the municipal employee end of things as an in-house planner. And midway through, between then and now, served as a senior planner with planning, engineering, and architecture firm. In that role, I served as municipal planner, board planner to roughly half a dozen northern New Jersey municipalities. Livingston is probably the closest one to Madison.
Have you appeared before our board?
Before the pandemic, I was before the board on an application about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I kind of remember you. Okay, we'll accept you.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pesolano, why don't you first describe what you've done in preparation for your testimony this evening?
I've gotten a very stiff back. A lot of research, a lot of sitting in my chair is how I got the stiff back. Just a little humor. But in reality, I joined the application in progress. I was retained at the end of February, and so I needed to catch up with not just the application materials on file, but what happened in the prior two meetings. I have been in attendance in the audience for the past 4 meetings. This would be the 5th meeting. consecutive that I've been participating in on this particular application. So I've informed myself about the nature of the application, pretty much up to speed with all of the changes, maybe not all the nuances to every detail of the plan, but I've reviewed professional memos of Mr. Stern and Mr. Harrington, and also, of course, evaluated the various multiple sheets of plans submitted by the applicant in connection with the project. More important than that, I did visit the property to understand the setting for my role, which is to evaluate the application from a planning analysis and advise as to whether the criteria required for the various types of relief have been attained.
And you were, before you start, you were present for Mr. Phillips' direct examination as well as my cross-examination, correct?
On May 6th, yes.
And this evening you were
Tonight.
present.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not seeing, I was here.
Please present your conclusions to the board, please.
Gladly. There is not going to be much in the way of explanation, except as it's germane to explanation of the project. You'll all be spared that. But I may touch on certain aspects of the physical design as I go along, as it relates to the substance of my findings, my testimony. I want to start by visiting with, I did visit with the municipal master plan and zoning regulations. I meant to say that as well as part of my preparation. And what I observed is that, like most municipalities, Madison has a zone plan, and a pretty fresh one at that. Land use plan adopted along with the vision plan in December 2020. There appears to have been planning activity along the lines of focusing tweaks concerning the CBD1 and CBD2 district, because the language, the introductory language in the zoning ordinance that governs CBD1 and CBD2 is exactly the same language, or maybe a few words different, as the land use plan that discusses the future for the CBD 1 and 2 districts. So from that right there, I take away the idea that this has been carefully studied by the planning and legislative functions of the community. My conclusion, most of all, though, is that the CBD1 zone is, without exception, regarded as the highest concentration of commercial activity in the community, and that is a desirable future for that zone to continue. While other zones might host commercial activity, this CBD1 is the commercial core, and that's certainly affirmed by what's on the ground, and certainly affirmed by the recent planning exercise to take a long look at adjustments to the CBD1 and 2 zoning regulations. The zone plan for the CBD1 district is to have ground floor retail and services with offices and residential on the upper floors. And that's pursuant to the purpose statement in section 195-32.4.a in the zoning ordinance, which was affirmed by the governing body in 2020. And that is all to take place within a 3-story structure, no higher than 3 stories. This, to me, translates into a mixed-use scenario whereby 1/3 of the floor area, the floor of a 3-story building, is to be commercial, and the remaining 2/3 for office and residential use. I take exception with the characterization of the application along the way as this is all about ground floor residential. To me, it's nothing as minimal as that. It is a significant deviation the application proposes to not have a substantial residential component over, the operative word here is over, any store or office. That is clearly not the intent of the CBD1 district. As I see it, the CBD1 district grew up, if you will, with the community. All communities evolve organically. It's not a snap of a finger and suddenly a town is there. Over time, decades, centuries, buildings show up, disappear, show up. But a fabric is established over time. And the only application of the word over in this context that makes any sense is that there is a resource for accommodating residential that supports the commercial, and that is the commercial itself. So let's encourage building residential space over the existing retail. It, of course, allows building over new retail. But I'm saying I perceive that that was the pathway to get to the standard that says apartments permitted over stores. I further believe that that regulation is a built-in intensity of use control by having the residential space track with the limits of the commercial space below it and no further. There is a section of the ordinance in the CC district of Madison that speaks directly to staying absolutely to go no farther than the lines of the commercial space below it when adding residential. So I take that to mean that's how the governing body is looking at that particular provision. So to focus further on the purpose statement, please bear with me. I know this is a little dry, but it really is the soul of this particular argument I'm making. In the purpose statement of section 195.32.4.a of the zoning ordinance, the CBD1 is to promote a vital mixed-use walkable downtown core designed to encourage street-level pedestrian activity through ground-level locally oriented retail uses and upper floor offices and residential uses. The CBD2 is to similarly promote a walkable and inviting streetscape with both mixed-use development and multifamily inclusionary development proximate to Main Street and transit service. While the CBD1 and CBD2 are both proximate to transit service, this diversion of purpose, the splitting of roles between the CBD1 and CBD2 is pivotal here. The desire to accommodate more of the helpful multifamily residential for support of the commercial sector, the commercial base, is desirable in the CBD2 district. In this current application, it's reversed. The intention is to shift the balance of the 1/3 commercial, 2/3 residential to almost 100% residential, but within the CBD1 district where multifamily as a use is not permitted at all, nor encouraged in the zone plan. Mixed use is. So with the commercial core as the center of attraction here, the CBD1 in particular, I see the zone plan as very good and a very well-considered plan that focuses on commercial in the core and encourages supporting residential more outside the core than within it. And that makes great sense too. Why? Because commercial core real estate is pretty rare. And if that is the attraction for bringing customer activity to support the stores, then it needs to be a primarily focused commercial environment. I don't believe it is the intention of the legislative body to trade away that very valuable and limited commercial potential that provides for a basis for attracting more customers to the benefit of all the merchants who may be visited by those customers, by making sure that the commercial core is performing first in the commercial mode, and secondly, supporting itself with additional infill residential. I see no basis, no planning directive whatsoever in the Madison Planning House, if you will, for promoting multifamily residential as a principal use.
But let me ask you a question, but are you rejecting all of this language that's in the master plan relative to e-commerce and rethinking retail in the post-COVID environment? I mean, it seems like you're positioning this to be very rigid, that it has to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're implying that there should be 9,000 feet of retail at this location, and that's the only thing that fits. Is that the message?
The message is, it is not the zone plan's intent to make wholesale conversions of commercial potential and residential potential to nearly 100% residential potential. That kind of conversion, in my observation over 40 years in this business, is fairly permanent. When commercial gets converted to residential, unless a disaster takes out that residential building, or it falls into such decay in a rapid period of time, it's there to stay for the long term. And so to the extent that the community wants to invigorate and keep vital its commercial sector, it's important to keep these commercial opportunities going and available. A little bit of vacancy, in my observation, is a healthy sign in the downtown area. That means that space is turning over. That means that the community can accept the latest thing that might be looking for space in an affluent community with a train, with great walkability throughout the town. Those opportunities the door needs to be held open on those for the vitality to go on.
But isn't that the argument? 9,000 square feet of retail is an awful lot for any retailer to absorb. And that poses a certain risk where this may end up being vacant. And I'm questioning why you would say, and I'm sort of going back and forth between the two planner arguments, sort of questioning what I've heard before, where it may differ from you. But the other planner argued that you still have retail on the street. You'll have one or two retail uses on the street, and so you are perpetuating foot traffic and commerce on the street. So how do you say that this is a bad thing, that we're not doing that?
I'm saying it deprives the district of the potential that is planned for it to have. And I keep returning to the zone plan. It's an essential piece of this evaluation because the legislative intent through the zoning ordinance, which implements the planning that's taken place so far, is setting a course for more focus on residential, particularly multifamily type residential and inclusionary development in the CBD2 district and other districts that accommodate that type of development, the CC district, et cetera, where they are. But the commercial core is a unique item in the zone plan because of its central focus and the epicenter of the commercial activity. But not only that, since you asked, Mr. Santoro, the primary location directly across from a train station is not necessarily something that should only be enjoyed by residents. Residents can live anywhere in the town almost and have a good, easy trip to the train station in multifamily where it's desired. It does not have to be forced to occur here because the train station is across the street. And to take that response a little further, it might be appropriate for a new office venture that wants office space at a transit node for its workers to be able to have flexibility to work in different locations and be able to get there without using a car or
Don't you think
using
it's
pollution or so forth.
Don't you think it's equally as important, and particularly after we heard testimony from Downtown Development Committee, they quoted an ergonomic study that, and also in the master plan, increasing residential use or residents living in the downtown is a very positive thing. So this is like the first time I think I'm hearing somebody say that it's not necessarily a good thing.
I'm saying that the concentration of residential is not desirable in the CBD1. There are abundant opportunities for accommodating the residential concentrations that are desired and within proximity of being able to support both the core commercial zones and the linear ones. The CC is more of a linear district, as you know. The CBDs are more blocky and in the center of things. So providing for that capacity for residential has already been done. It doesn't require an applicant to jostle the zone plan in such an abrupt manner to get more residential simply because it seems like the right thing to do. There is a plan for doing that in response to the urbanomic study, in response to the planning and the thinking and the community input that says we need residential to help support the commercial. That plan is in place, but I'm saying this application does not track with that plan because it seeks to put out of place a mostly residential building where commercial potential, I think, for the long run is much more valuable to the community as a whole than a few more dwellings in this particular location.
Yeah, I'm just having trouble processing 9,000 square foot of retail on a forward-looking basis. That's my concern.
If you would feel more comfortable, consider a split of that in whatever fashion between retail and back office space. There are, IT professions emerging we haven't even heard of yet that might find this a wonderful location for a windowless space where they could work and jump on the train, get into the city, do some more work, meet some new clients, jump back to Madison. We don't know what the innovations are around the corner. And that's why I think it's foolhardy, actually, to trade away commercial potential, which you're not going to get back once it's gone out of your commercial core. May I continue with my testimony?
Yeah.
And
I apologize, but when I hear something that seems to conflict with what I've heard before, I want to stop and make sure I understand it, because I don't want to neglect it and not get back to it and challenge it if that's what's necessary.
Don't get me wrong. I'm glad you asked for clarification. Thank you. So I think we've spent fair enough time on the CBD zone purposes, but it's important to mention that there are 4 principles that are guiding the overall health and vitality of the 2 CBD zones. One is to preserve and maintain a streetscape consistent with downtown design principles. 2 is to encourage the reuse and rehabilitation of historic structures. Well, that ship has sailed just recently, unfortunately. 3 is to maintain the character and scale of buildings to promote pedestrian accessibility and safety. 4 is to encourage locally oriented retail businesses and services. So a building that tracks with the 1/3, 2/3 model that I spoke of earlier advances those all except for the historic component, but you need a historic property to advance that principle. Now let me move on to the actual extent and scope of deviations from the zone plan as I see it in this application. It did involve the removal of a substantial historic asset. It will provide for a substantial dilution, if approved, of the ratio of commercial space to residential space, such that 94% of the floor area would be devoted to residential and only 6% for commercial. Again, the zone plan wants at least 33% commercial. It's not saying that it has to be all residential on the upper floors. It can be a mixture of office and residential. And again, that's validation of the idea that the economic core needs to be utilized economically as well as residentially. So I think that this split down from 33, at least 33% commercial to only 6 substantially undermines the intent and purpose of the zone plan I've been speaking of by depriving the downtown core of its intended commercial potential. In essence, trading critically important commercial capacity for increased residential capacity, where residential capacity is non-essential right here per the zone plan. There are abundant opportunities, as I said, for accomplishing the residential supplement to the commercial district's success. There was discussion about a restaurant being targeted, so that is something I was curious about. I will leave that go. I understand that a restaurant is a question mark, so that's not part of the proposal as I speak. I want to point out that one of the other significant deviations from the zone plan and the zoning ordinance is the new structure that has the appearance of a 4-story structure where a maximum of 3 stories is permitted. To me, it has that look because when you're either at the sidewalk across the street looking at the proposed building or from the train station platform above, you can see from the sidewalk level stories 1, 2, and 3 with their distinctive delineations. And then there's stuff above 3rd floor. What else are you going to conclude that that's a 4th story? Then if you turn to the sides and look at the length of the windows, you know something is different going on there. And without being inside, you would conclude most likely that that's a 4th story without having the benefit of witnessing these hearings that's been extensively discussed. But my opinion is that if it looks like a 4-story building, it might as well be one. And the damage from that, unfortunately, is that it sends a signal that if that 4-story building can be built, I guess the town's in favor of that. Why am I being only limited to 3 stories? So this also proposes a new non-conforming building that substantially fails to observe the required rear yard setback and maximum impervious coverage. As you know, there's no building coverage limit, but the maximum impervious coverage is way up near 100%. I'm sorry, the proposed impervious coverage is near 100%. And the rear yard setback is a mere 1.1 feet. Now, I bring that up with that kind of emphasis because it's shocking to me that where an opportunity to produce a better fit, more conforming building relative to its neighbors is presented and not utilized, not pursued. In fact, it's repeated after demolition of a structure that's similarly stood at such dimension, but do 2 wrongs make a right here? I believe that this opportunity is rare and important to take advantage of to bring this property more into conformance with the rear yard setback, particularly in this location where the deficiency is proposed. We're roughly 47 feet along the rear property line. That's the straight part of the rear property line before you get to the trash enclosure area. A wall of roughly 50 feet in height. It's a little staggered at the very top, but still a 50-foot tall building is only 30 feet away from the adjoining 8-unit residential building on lot 11. And as I read the ordinance, there's very much an intention to take stock of existing residential uses and residential zones in terms of buffering new projects from them, or buffering them from the new projects, I should put it. Here, there's not any consideration for that whatsoever. It's just going to the max, and I believe it's strictly for the purpose of optimizing the number of luxury units that can be put into this building, whether luxury or not doesn't matter to me, but that's what the proposal is, as I heard it. And so this opportunity was not utilized by the applicant. The building is gone. This is a clean slate site, and there are no constraints from an existing building perspective to building a 25-foot setback for the property. The trash enclosure also lacking in any kind of setback. And the existence of the two-story, 8-unit residential structure on lot 11 matters here because the ordinance doesn't distinguish whether it's renters or owners or what type of building they live in. It just says residential uses shall be buffered. That brings me to the residential buffer. The list of variance relief that was last supplied by Mr. Wolfson's office, I believe, cites a need for residential landscape buffer 32.4 G1, which requires a minimum of 10-foot landscape buffer where a non-residential or mixed-use development is contiguous to a residential use or zone. So we clearly have a residential use on lot 11 as per earlier testimony by Mr. Phillips. Maybe that was on cross-examination, but nonetheless, acknowledged already that there's residential use on lot 11. And indeed, by my own observation from touring the site in the area, it is indeed residential. So the setback opportunity not embraced, nor the landscape buffer where it would matter most to the residents in that existing building. There are also multiple variances for non-conforming parking, signage, and buffering. On that list I was just referring to, plus 14 design waivers concerning lighting, number of parking spaces, parking stall width, driveway and sidewalk widths, sidewalk extent, retaining wall setbacks, refuse area setback, driveway grade, and parking lot landscaping. As I said before, the applicant, through its witnesses, has characterized the basis for the D1 variance as being due to the ground floor residential component only. But in reality, as Mr. Simon alluded to in his questioning of Mr. Phillips, indeed, roughly 78% of the building's usable floor area or volume is not over any store or office. That makes it look, walk, and talk more like a multifamily structure than a mixed-use building, in my opinion. So what are the problems with these arrangements? As I see it, it makes the site particularly inappropriate for a shift, a sharp shift away from the intent of the zone plan here by proposing a multifamily use with accessory retail. That's not a use that is mentioned in the list of permitted uses. It was interesting to note Mr. Stern's always excellent memos that he called it pretty much that in his January 22 memo. I couldn't agree more. On page 2, the proposal is to demolish the existing theater and construct a 24-unit multifamily residential apartment building with partial ground floor retail. I like to call them as I see them, and I think Mr. Stern does too. We're on the same page there, but the fact of the matter is that this area does not invite that type of building or that type of, or that extent of residential utilization in the absence of commercial fully below it. Since the location is the gateway to the commercial core of the community, right opposite the train station, someone coming out of that train station is greeted by this property. And And there is no support whatsoever in the zone plan or zoning ordinance for a 100% residential project in this location. And it brings me back again to the planning process that has recently gone on. The governing body fully had the opportunity to beef up the residential side of things in the CBD1 as well as the CBD2, which it recently did. It chose not to. It chose to preserve the pristineness of the commercial core of the CBD1 for more commercial orientation than residential. So the introduction here of substantially more utilization of a substandard access driveway creates risks that are associated with this application. As I understand the application and the testimony from various witnesses, there would be substantial new daily traffic added to that of multiple existing users in a confusing arrangement of access and circulation. I say confusing not because I heard someone else say it, but because that was my own observation in trying to figure out what way vehicles are going today. And it really was pretty challenging. As Mr. Simon noted, there is a one-way in arrow under the British Home Emporium building, the tunnel from Main Street. It's one vehicle wide, two vehicles can't pass each other, but it brings traffic in. Presumably, they're not to go out that way because there is a very bold yellow arrow pointing into the site, but no arrow indicating on the site, behind the building, in the tunnel, or anything indicating you should go out this way too. So that's the first observation of what I will call a pattern of confusion potential associated with the shared driveway as it currently exists. But again, additional utilization, significant daily additional utilization is proposed by this application. The work I do brings my focus to how a site will function in terms of how vehicles get around on the site, their access points. And I also look very closely with every site plan I review for circulation pinch points or potential points of conflict. And I was astounded to see in such a small, compact area, the number of opportunities for conflicts between vehicles and vehicles and pedestrians, vehicles and bicycles. Starting with that confusing entry through lot 11, when a vehicle approaches the lot line of lot 23, where the easement continues today, there is a trash collection area for two different sites, for lot 24, the subject property, and lot 11. There are angled spaces on lot 11 that would back into this same circulation area for accessing those two refuse areas. There's an unknown relationship of vehicles from lot 12 coming and going into that mix. In the proposal, a garage door for the lower level parking is just to the south or east of this end of the building, where all of these potential conflict points occur. And by the way, the building itself represents a visual obstacle to clear view of what vehicles may be coming and going. Secondly, there is a very short fuse of time awareness before you know that there may be something to watch out for, because vehicles in the current arrangement and in the proposed arrangement, even more so, can come and go in multiple different directions with very little warning that they're even there.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I think the witness is getting dangerously close to testifying as a traffic engineer.
Yes, I agree, because we've been through all this and we heard testimony of traffic experts and it differs with what was just said, I believe.
I
And
believe that I can testify, first of all, as a planner, because the New Jersey Administrative Code, Section 13, specifically authorizes licensed professional planners in New Jersey to prepare site plans that include parking spaces, driveways, access, circulation. So if they're empowered to prepare those plans, it's inferential that they know what they're talking about in terms of circulation. Secondly, the discussion about traffic was the number of vehicles coming and going and whether that was a substantial impact on the roadway. I heard very, very little discussion about the interior dynamics of internal circulation among 5 sites competing for the same space on a shared access driveway. Please forgive me if I sound like a traffic engineer. I am not intending to represent myself as that, but by golly, after 40 years of reviewing hundreds and hundreds of site plans and intricate ones at that, involving vehicle movements and threats to safety, I have enough education and experience to speak authoritatively on that topic respectfully.
Mr. Chairman, we renew our objection and ask that the witness stay on planning.
Mr. Pasolano just described within his area of expertise what he's allowed to opine on, and he's sticking to what he's observing by way of a site plan, which he's permitted by the New Jersey Administrative Code to prepare. And I respectfully ask that he be allowed to continue with this line of testimony, and the board can accept it for what it is and weigh the various experts like they always do for any development application.
well, I agree that the board has the option to believe whichever expert it wants to, including relying upon its own expert, which we heard, and it differs, I think, from what was just said. But if you want to testify somewhat on that, but I don't want to go on at length on traffic at this point.
That's understandable. Please proceed, Mr. Pasolano.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the concern. Professionals should stay within discipline. That's a good thing. But what is presented in the application is fodder for me to give feedback on. One of the things is a proposed sign to keep vehicles from going in the wrong direction from lot 23 onto lot 11. I find that a very inadequate control mechanism, especially if people habitually have been going that way for maybe decades at this point. So I'm doubtful that a sign is going to do it.
Mr. Chairman, the witness is now testifying again as a traffic expert and is now saying that all directional signage that's utilized is irrelevant.
It's exactly what he did not say, Mr. Wolfson, and you know it. And Mr. Pasolano, again, is just making observations of the site plan as a professional planner with regard to this application, and particularly the fact that there's abundant amount of relief that is required of this applicant inherent to the application, including many aspects of the site plan.
Wait a minute, I have to jump in here. He opined that signage was wrong. And I think, forget about all this other stuff. He opined that signs won't work. Well, what would work? It's there now. I mean, don't throw rocks without suggesting something else. He's saying, don't enter sign will be ignored. Well, what's the applicant supposed to do about that? He hasn't proposed anything different. I mean, I'm concerned about that. That's, he can talk about conflicts all he wants, but to opine that signs that the public will ignore signs and thus it's inadequate, I have a problem with that.
Mr. Pasolano, can you continue with that
Yes,
warning, so to speak,
thank you,
please?
Mr.
Thank
Simon.
you.
So noted. Thank you, Mr. Hall. A regulatory provision now. There is a regulation that requires 30-foot width for two-way movement. That's in fact one of the waivers that's requested on the list of variances and waivers pursuant to section 195-25.15, section I3. Minimum driveway width of 30 feet for two-way traffic. A driveway width of 20 feet is proposed in the application. Applicant's words, not mine. The driveway width here is 33% less wide at only 20 feet. Is there an opportunity for it to be conforming? I think so, especially with the building gone. There's no limitation to making that driveway a conforming width at this point. The applicant is willing to bring the driveway onto its own property to fashion this arrangement. So there to me is no obstacle to producing a conforming driveway arrangement. And again, in the middle of it all is an older wood frame building on lot 11 behind the British Home Emporium containing 8 dwelling units. This particular building is further enclosed on a very small site area by continuous gateless fencing to the rear of it and in front of the parking in front of it. These dwellings are additionally threatened by the possibility of trash fires, in my opinion, or even vehicle fires. And I say that because of the close confines of how things must operate within those very small access areas. It's basically an alleyway, not a roadway, in my opinion.
I believe there was testimony to the effect from the fire chief that there was not an issue with that. So why are you bringing up, you think it's a fire hazard?
I'm bringing up the possibility that could occur, yes.
Please proceed, Mr. Pessalano.
So if either end of this substandard access way becomes blocked, or both, God forbid, emergency access to these 8 dwellings or rapid escape from them may be severely constrained. Again, we have a proposal on the table for a massive building with effectively no rear setback where 25 feet is required. And I find that just such a sharp departure from the intent of the zoning ordinance and zone plan. While the applicant focused its height analysis on the front view, it provided minimal focus, on the relationship of a building mass equivalent of 5 stories at the rear lot line. Even though the former structure was there at a similar scale, there has been no attempt to make better this extreme contrast between the subject building and the 2-story residential use to the immediate rear, literally in the shadow of the larger building in this case. I believe that all of the focus over the most recent meetings before the May 6th meeting on the ancillary improvements to parking lots that would access the access easement has really no compensatory bearing on the detriment imposed by rebuilding at a substantially non-conforming setback and substantially non-conforming impervious coverage. Again, the opportunity is there, it's not being utilized. Mr. Simon had some questions for Mr. Phillips about the additional relief related to the driveway arrangements. Mr. Simon, do you wish me to provide direct, or do you want to do a Q&A with me?
You can just do it 30 seconds on that.
All right, gladly. Thank you. Here we have a proposal for a new expanded driveway that enters onto more of lot 24 than it ever has before. In other words, the new driveway area that did not exist. And now this new driveway, by virtue of the plan before the board, is to be used by lots 11, 12, 22, and 23. Those 4 lots, in my opinion, each need new use variance relief due to their new use of lot 24 not being located on their respective lots. And the reason is that a driveway is an accessory use, and an accessory use takes on the color of the principal use that it relates to. So in effect, if you have a use on lot XYZ and you put a driveway for that use on someone else's property, you're effectively putting characteristics of that use onto the other property. And that is the basis for a determination on my part that use variance relief would be necessary for all four of those lots to utilize the reconfigured expanded driveway.
And that would also, just let me chime in terms of the lot 24 prohibited use that is being proposed, the fact that it is utilizing and relying in part on lot 23 for a new prohibited residential use, that would also trigger a use variance for that as well, correct?
Thank you for that catch. Yes, it certainly would.
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you. So now my testimony comes to analysis of the criteria for the requested relief. As was stated by Mr. Phillips correctly, there's a Medici analysis required for a D1 relief. In this case, it's not an inherently beneficial use. So it follows the test of Medici, which is a four-part test dealing with special reasons, particular suitability, substantial detriment, and impairment to the zone plan. An enhanced quality of proof to evaluate whether or not it is inconsistent with the zone plan, called the enhanced quality of proof. I'll come to that in a moment. And at the end of that evaluation, on balance, do the benefits of the application outweigh the detriments? So my breakdown of these particular elements is as follows. I heard Mr. Phillips talk about taking advantage of a sloping site as one of the bases for finding that this site is particularly suitable. I believe that could be done with the full ground floor of commercial in a mixed-use building just as readily. It does not require a residential, nearly 100% residential use to accomplish this. Secondly, there was discussion about the site being constrained by the slope altogether and the access being limited on Lincoln Place. The site is actually 82 feet wide, as I read Mr. Keller's site plan drawing. And so far more narrow properties, in my experience, have hosted a garage ramp down from the street into a lower level garage, not even needing a side facing door, as is the case in this particular proposal. I can speak with authority that it actually is done, probably more commonly in Hudson County communities, but that's neither here nor there. The fact is the physical arrangements can achieve a result if the intention is to do so. The location of the site near transit, directly across from the train station, and also near other transit resources for that matter, I think is a weak argument because a full first floor of commercial tenants here would enable its employees, customers, and visitors to access it via superb transit services, a similar benefit said to accrue to the excessive residential component I've been talking about. As far as accommodation of retail or offices at the street level, I think that nothing truly prevents a mixture of offices with retail at the, nothing prevents a mixture of Retail with offices at the rear of the ground floor and retail at the front of the ground floor. That would be a nice mix for filling that space nicely. I've spoken to that already. All of that would bring pedestrians to and from the sidewalk in front of the building and the immediate environs on a daily basis. So that would certainly fulfill just as readily the wishes of the zone plan as at least as much, if not more so, I think, than an all residential building where occupants may just leave for the day, not shop locally at midday or anything, and come back. I also disagree with the assertion that a lot that is slightly larger than the zone standard is unusable for retail or offices in today's market. The term today's market is a wiggly thing in my observation. What is valid today wasn't valid a few years ago and will not be valid probably in a few years as well. It's a constantly changing scene driven by innovation, driven by needs, changing demographics, etc. So in my experience, I have been doing commercial real estate as a licensed salesperson in New Jersey for the past 10 years and shown plenty of retail spaces.
Mr. Chairman, at this point, he's testifying in an entirely different field than that which he was qualified for and proffered for. Please keep him on planning.
Yes, please do that.
Will do. Nonetheless, I find that there's no obstacle to adapting a space to a need. It's particularly in this high-profile location where you not only have the train station, you have, per Mr. Keller, abundant supply of nearby parking resources. You also have the drawing power of the post office right next door, and of course the traffic to and from the train station itself. That would be, in my opinion, a wonderful location for business that relied on foot traffic. I think a smaller number of residential units here would be a better fit. And that would be also toward reducing the magnitude of the RSIS parking deficiency in an area of high demand for on-street parking. I want to observe that the project failed flat out to preserve, reuse, or repurpose an historic resource, which actually cannot be recreated. It's gone. The demolition of the building frustrates the objectives of MLUL, Municipal Land Use Law Purpose J, which is
I have to interrupt right here. The HPC approved demolition. So how can you testify? Well, you can testify however you want, but I think the record should be clear that the Madison Historic Preservation Commission authorized demolition of the building based on a record that it was beyond repair. So
it is still contrary to the planning policy for the borough, Mr. Hall.
Yeah, but in terms of how the board should process what you're saying, the board is fully aware of the circumstances of the theater. We heard the appeal of conditions imposed by HPC. We understand that the building is not salvageable, walls separating and so on and so forth. So it was either going to be demolished at some point or perhaps fall down. So you can't blame anybody for this being not surviving, put it that way. It was too far gone. I don't think anybody's going to refute that.
Okay.
Please base your opinions on some facts and not just assumptions, if you would.
Where the CBD2 zone in the zone plan emphasizes placement of inclusionary multifamily housing so as to be near shops and transit, this project is not in sync with that intention because this CBD1 zone is not the most appropriate location for nearly 100% multifamily use. Further determination very recently of that of the governing body. So I don't believe that a representation that purpose G of the municipal land use law, as done in Mr. Phillips' report and testimony, particularly applies here because it's not a particularly appropriate location for almost 100% multifamily housing for the reasons I've already stated. The next part of the Medici analysis is regarding the substantial detriment to the public good. I believe that the cited positives for the project are insufficient to overcome the considerable number and magnitude of detriments to the public good. Adding a greater number of units than would be permitted for a conforming property that has direct access to a public street. Putting that instead in a location that's prone to congestion, as we've already discussed. Don't want to get yelled at again. It compounds the following conditions: the driveway arrangement, the driveway connections to the public street, the slope of the new driveway not meeting the standard is problematic. The high number of dwelling units, well, let me just also say and observe that I found the record to be lacking in substantive factual information regarding the nature and intensity of use of the shared driveway and how it might operate together with proposed 24 new apartments. So it's a little bit of a stretch to be advised that that's already been considered. I'm not aware of the facts that were considered if it was considered. So the high number of dwelling units for which the D1 relief is focused on really drives the failure of the proposed new structure to observe basic bulk requirements that it can very well achieve, and others are expected to achieve to implement the zone plan. To accommodate 24 units, 78% of the ground floor is proposed for residential use, instead of 100% of the ground floor being for beneficial commercial use. The building mass at the rear property line is substantially impactful to the adjacent two-story residential use line within 30 or so feet of the proposed building. Literal limitation of light and air by a 50-foot structure too close to the rear lot line here. I did some rough calculation, at least 4,500 square feet of the proposed building floor area, not including the mezzanine, but all of it residential and its parking, none of it over commercial, would be implicated in this 25-foot setback encroachment area. The truly non-permitted aspect of this application is effectively jammed into the back corner of the lot without any regard for buffering to properties entitled to that buffering, according to the ordinance. The storage and retrieval of trash at the lot line of lot 24 and in close proximity to the existing homes where a 25 setback for such activity is required would be substantially less impactful, but again, no such initiative from the applicant's perspective, despite having room to do so. And as I mentioned, the lack of the rear setback also prevents the placement of the 10-foot residential landscape buffer between these two uses. The 8-unit residential on lot 11 and the proposed 24-unit on lot 24. This brings me to the fourth part of the Medici analysis regarding substantial impairment to the zone plan, zone ordinance's intent and purpose.
Are you also going to reflect on the enhanced quality of proof with regard
Yes.
to this as well? Thank you.
This is where we'll grab that. Thank you. Per my earlier comments, the proposed deviation from the zone plan is substantial in terms of the building being principally a multifamily structure with very minor accessory retail, 94% residential floor area compared to 6% commercial floor area. 70% of the proposed building in its entirety is not above any store or office use. Again, the zone plan wants at least 33% ground floor commercial. I'm sorry, at least 33% commercial in a CBD1 building, mixed use building. The appearance of a 4-story multifamily building where the zone plan wants no more than a 3-story appearance with a use mix of at least 33% commercial apartments, only above stores or offices on no more than 2 upper floors. That's the expectation, but the building, again, exceeds the look of a 3-story building having more the look of a 4-story building, in my opinion. The enhanced quality of proof part of the Medici analysis was said to be satisfied by changed conditions, as I heard Mr. Phillips' testimony and read in his report. Changing conditions in the retail environment, changing conditions in terms of the demand for apartments in downtowns in general, multifamily, trend towards smaller spaces being desirable. And that was populated with, in his testimony, with an informal look at the depth of retail spaces within the borough. However, I return to the more important consideration that the governing body very recently considered the preferred desired locations for multifamily uses as recently as 2020. But when it amended the regulations for the CBD zones and several others, it chose not to encourage more residential development in the form of multifamily uses in the CBD1 zone, knowing that that is a desired thing to do to support the commercial sector. This, to me, can and should be construed as an endorsement of the desire to have the ground floors in the CBD fully occupied by commercial uses in support of this particular zone as the borough's commercial core. So I find that the enhanced quality of proof test, while it introduced changed conditions, I think the more important factor here is that the recency of the governing body's consideration, I would expect the governing body to have the knowledge of local conditions more so than anybody in terms of where the appropriate placement of principally multifamily uses should go. Regarding the bulk and waiver relief, I'll be brief here. I would say that the detriments that accrue to the use variance that I've spoken to also accrue to the C2 weighing analysis. Mr. Phillips, I believe, correctly pointed out that the C2 test was appropriate here since no physical hardship conditions were driving any of the variance deficiencies. I don't think that there is enough benefit to the public from the overall application, given its problems, as I've spoken at length about, for the variance relief to be granted under the C2 test so as to substantially outweigh known detriments. The jury is still out on whether there is more to the story about how the easement actually functions in terms of the users, intensities, and so forth. So it's a little maybe premature to conclude that there are not hidden issues. The waivers themselves need to be related to some practical difficulty in complying, difficulty with the land itself in complying. I'll point out that this is an oversized site in the zone, 82 feet wide, and more than the quite a bit more than the 100-foot minimum depth. So it has the capacity. The building envelope is fairly rectangular. Admittedly, there's an odd protrusion out of that shape at the rear, but the applicant demonstrated that it could utilize that for a trash enclosure. So truly, I see no basis for not complying with the design requirements the borough expects of property developers. So in summary, I believe the application, as you might well guess, I believe should be rejected. Where the Medici analysis results in a conclusion that on balance, the benefits of the application, I'm sorry, let me start over. Where the Medici analysis results in a conclusion that on balance, the benefits of the application outweigh the detriments, approval can be considered. Where the balance is not on the benefit side, approval is not warranted. According to my earlier testimony, special reasons not truly demonstrated here, since they would similarly accrue to a conforming use of a similar nature on this site, but conforming as to the apartments being truly over the stores or offices. The suitability of the site due to the location in the core of the commercial downtown, where intensive multifamily use is not encouraged at all, and residential use is not encouraged as much as other locations, such as the adjacent CBD2 and CC zones. I find that the site is not particularly suitable for this use at all. In addition, there are multiple reasons why it is a desirable and highly appropriate location for the fullest allowable extent of commercial utilization. I find that the substantial detriments to the public good were ponderous and indeed substantial. The use would permanently displace valuable economic development potential that is of concern to the borough's population, as witnessed through the planning documents I've reviewed. The daily function of the site's access would impact 4 other users of the shared easement, on which the project relies on access to residential parking and collection of solid waste by the additional daily traffic associated with these 2 functions. The public, particularly pedestrians, would be in the mix here. I'll leave it at that. The proposed building would tower over the adjoining land to the rear, where almost no rear setback is proposed and 25 feet is required and realistic to achieve as well. I find that these and the various other problems are not adequately balanced by any of the public benefits offered by the applicant's testimony. One of which, incidentally, as I reviewed my notes, was that the removal of the building was a benefit. Well, that has happened before the board has even considered the application. So I don't believe that that should be part of the board's consideration as a benefit. And finally, the intent and purpose of the zone plan and zoning ordinance is strongly challenged by this application's proposed substantial departure from the community planning vision, particularly for the CBD1 district, as articulated very clearly in the zoning ordinance purpose statement for the CBD1 and CBD2 central business district zones. This is measured by the discordantly low ratio of commercial to residential in the borough's commercial core by this project, plus a building that exhibits the appearance of 4 stories, where 3 stories are the maximum in both CBD zones. The regulatory framework for the CBD zones was very recently reviewed and modified by the governing body, which in 2020 chose not to alter the focus of the community's commercial core away from being the zone of the highest orientation to commercial activity. Given this recent history and regulatory framework, I find that there would be that there would be substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the zone plan zoning ordinance for the CBD1 zone. The 4-part Medici analysis I have offered indicates none of the 4 elements are satisfied. The benefits do not outweigh the detriments. Therefore, I suggest and determine that denial is clearly warranted for this application. Thank you.
So with regard to the use variance that's been applied for, with regard to the bulk variances that are being applied for, with regard to the exception relief that is being applied for, with respect to the RSIS de minimis exception relief that is being applied for all the reasons that you testified to, do you believe that the applicant has failed to meet their burden of proof with regard to the positive and negative criteria for the variances, for demonstrating exception relief pursuant to Section 51B of the municipal land use law regarding the exception relief, and failing to comply with the standards for de minimis exception under the RSIS?
Indeed, I do.
Okay, I have nothing further at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting there. Gary, would this be an opportunity for Mr. Wolfson to rebut or cross-examine Mr. Pesolano?
I would suggest that board members may want to ask questions first.
Okay.
Peter, let me ask you though, before that, I mean, it's 10:20. I mean, what are your thoughts on the time requirements for your questioning?
My questioning will be relatively brief
Okay.
compared to the questioning you've heard tonight. Typically, if we were in person, we would huddle as a team and talk about what we intend to do going forward, depending on the board's pleasure in terms of the late hour. We obviously will be guided by that. But I think a starting point of having the board ask questions of this witness is a logical one.
Yeah, and the other question, just procedurally, we have Mr. Stern with us. He can ask questions, but I don't know whether the board would want to hear his opinions as well, which might take more time. I just throw it all out in the mix of things as far as.
Well, let's start with the board. Does the board have any particular questions of the witness?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm a little troubled by the whole concept of that the entire first floor must be commercial. It just seems to me that when you've got a deep building such as this, that by the time you get to the back of the building, and perhaps someone would have an office back there, but is it truly that crucial? Do you feel that the entire first floor be totally commercial? And do you think that changes the validity of the application if the entire first floor were commercial rather than having, you know, a couple of apartments in the back?
Well, first, thank you for the question. In my observation and experience, 100-foot deep retail spaces are not unusual and often host restaurants and so forth because they have the need for the storage and the kitchen space at the back and the tables and the greeting up front. But the property should not be viewed as a 135-foot deep property for hosting a 135-foot deep building, because that's a non-conforming building. As I mentioned in my testimony, a 25-foot rear setback is required.
Can I interrupt with another question? You seemed to be okay with the fact that the movie theater took up all that space, and this building is not substantially different in size in terms of setbacks and height than the original movie theater building. So, all right, the movie theater building is gone, and yes, that does give somebody the opportunity to change it. But if they simply fixed the movie theater building and kept it there, would you still think that they really should have done all these other things?
No, keeping the building would be a game changer.
That decrepit building with the sides falling down and that was becoming a structural nightmare and quite frankly, an eyesore.
I hear you. I'm not advocating you embrace an eyesore indefinitely, but there's always potential for refurbishing buildings, and perhaps worse ones than that have been restored. I don't know. But the opportunity is real for conformance when you remove that building and start from scratch. I'm 100% certain of that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
If I could ask a follow-up question on that. Mr. Pesolano, did you conduct a study and evaluation of retail space sizes in the CBD1 district in Madison?
No.
Okay. Was one appropriate?
I believe it's the applicant's burden of proof to suss out those things to make its case, not the,
Okay.
the objector.
But you didn't need to do it to disagree with him. Okay. The other question on that, while I'm asking questions, you threw out this certain various percentage numbers. I have 78% residential for the whole building. Where did those numbers come from? Did you do calculations? How did that?
Yes.
You personally did?
Yes, I took a look at the architectural plans and utilized some crude measurements, I'll say, because I did it on screen. I didn't have prints of the full-size plans, but thankfully graphic scales were provided by the designers. And so I could take a piece of paper and come up with a 5-foot distance or an 8-foot distance and make those measurements on screen.
And did you count the base, the garage level at all? Or was that just ignored? How did that work?
I did not, except for the chunk that's in the 25-foot setback, I did not include the garage level in my percentage breakdowns.
And how about the mezzanine? I guess we
No,
call
didn't include the mezzanine either.
Okay, so it's just the footprint of the 3 stories.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Just want to understand that.
Okay.
Further questions from the board? Okay, what I'd like to hear from Mr. Stern.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, Michael, how are you?
Just Ducky, Russell, how are you?
Good. Soon we'll see each other in person. I have a question for you. You made a comment that residential capacity was non-essential. How does that fit in with the urbanomics study that was addressed by the Downtown Development Commissioner representative? I think that was a couple of meetings ago, because the urbanomics study, that 2017 revitalization study, was looking to bring more residential population into the downtown core, that also helps promote a thriving downtown. It would appear that this application would help fulfill that. Downtown Development Commission appeared to be in support of the application. They had no objections. And how does that comment relate to the urbanomics study that was looking for additional urban residential population in the downtown?
Mm-hmm. Good question. And I carefully considered that as well. And one of the thoughts that I had that might have been the basis for isolating the CBD1 away from the multifamily principal use idea is that there's a finite supply of parking. And where that parking is valuable to support the commercial core, it should not be stressed or challenged or undermined or compete with parking for residential uses. Perhaps, I don't know that, but that would be a real logical reason not to add a residential in as much measure to the CBD1 district.
That report didn't distinguish between CBD1 and CBD2.
Okay, but as the order of things go, the buck stops at the governing body's desk, so to speak, and they are the legislative body, and also had the input probably in person from the economics producers, and still determined that there should be a different focus between the 2 CBD zones. That impressed me greatly.
Now, of course, the zoning typically follows the master plan. It was in the 2020 master plan. It wasn't mentioned by you, but under the strategies, this is a quote from the master plan strategies. It says, clarify the extent and amount of ground floor retail and commercial uses required to allow apartments above store and offices.
Mm-hmm.
And I raise that because that flies in the face somewhat to your argument that the planning board analyzed the zoning, and they found that, in essence, lack of better words, perhaps a flaw in that provision within the CBD1 district, because they're looking for further analysis of that. This standard is a one-size-fits-all standard. So if you have a smaller building, then it's on a smaller lot, then it's a smaller amount of retail. In this case, it's a larger building, larger lot, you'd have a larger amount of retail, which could have problems associated with it. Loading, parking, because the district doesn't require parking. There'd be greater competition in the downtown area for that parking associated with it. But the point and the question for you is, how do you reconcile that this provision says, hey, we have to essentially analyze that that provision of the zoning ordinance.
It makes sense to me, Russell, because we've already had a lively exchange on that very question. I look forward to a definitive answer on it. I believe it does warrant clarification so that all who see it on the first shot can embrace what it means. But I did a much deeper analysis to conclude that it would be meaningless if it was just above a retail thing, to the point that I thought of a ridiculous example to illustrate the point. What if there was a 10 square foot key maker's kiosk on the ground floor and then 100 apartments above that on stilts? Would that be sensible? So it drove me more to the conclusion that I reached, which is that for it to be meaningful and to track with the organic growth of the downtown area, the opportunities for more residential, but not overly overdone to overwhelm the area, sit on the rooftops of one-story commercial buildings. And so that's how I saw it coming into being.
Well, I'm sorry, but I don't understand. How can you say overwhelm when the ergonomic study says that we're at only about half of what we should have in terms of residential in the downtown? I think that was the testimony. That was testimony of DDC.
My assessment of how this provision might have come into being might have been that. I don't know if someone used the word overwhelm.
Well, just to carry on what Russell said, and I did, after Mr. Phillips had testified, I had printed out the current master plan, the new master plan, and section K is what under strategies is what Mr. Stern was talking about. But the goal number 3 on goals and objectives, right at the front of the document, says protect and enhance the economic vitality of the downtown by encouraging combined residential and commercial development in the CBD core, downtown living opportunities and flexible use of the sidewalk, realm, public space, and retail businesses. I mean, isn't that what we're supposed to do, is consider possible deviations from what was? I mean, to look at this differently.
That's certainly your call and your colleagues' call on the board. But as a planner looking at this objectively, I believe that there is opportunity for apartments to be constructed in conformance with the interpretation I've given it. 2/3, 1/3 split is entirely achievable. I'm not saying don't have residential in the CBD1. None of my testimony has asserted that. The manner in which it is accommodated is what's in question.
Joe, may I?
Of course, please.
So I was wondering if you considered the proximity of the affordable units that would be embedded in the project to the train, to the supermarket, and to Madison's public schools. And if so, what would your planning perspective be on that?
I did not consider the affordable units in that context. It's a great question, though. It's a good thing to locate affordable housing near transit, shopping, employment, etc. Generally speaking, particularly benefits those less able to afford other forms of transportation. But in the actual world, train travel is not all that efficient or cost effective either. Might be sometimes less expensive than other modes, but again, we're an evolving society, and innovations in response to limitations spring up overnight and fill a void all the time. And so I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other board members?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Just another question. You mentioned that you had traffic concerns. And were you were you present during Mr. Maltz's review of the application?
I had reviewed his correspondence about evaluating the traffic study.
Right. It seems to be his opinion was in conflict with yours. You've raised traffic concerns, and Mr. Maltz didn't have those same concerns. And overall, he said the numbers were so small that that it was not of a concern.
Okay. I'm not going to argue with Mr. Maltz's conclusion.
Okay. And then just this is my last one. The borough's planning documents, you know, they do mention and promote shared parking. Excuse me, shared parking and shared access drives. And so in your opinion, while the borough would be promoting shared access drives, you would say that's a use variance, and you now have to go through the higher hurdle and obtain your approvals through the zoning board? I mean, is that what you're saying? Because you're saying in this application, a use variance would be required for the shared traffic aisle, correct? Or did I hear that incorrectly?
For the utilization of another lot with a use accessory to a different lot.
Like driveway.
Yeah.
Right. In the towns you're involved in, do you call them use variances, or you don't promote shared access drives?
I'm no longer the board planner anywhere. So sorry, but I call them what I called them in this testimony I gave tonight. You have the introduction of a use element from one use onto another property with a shared driveway arrangement, because it has not been well explored from that legal viewpoint. I don't know what to say, but it doesn't change the idea that principal uses and accessory uses matter in the zoning world, and you have to carefully evaluate them to take the right path.
Okay.
Well,
I'm done, Mr. Chairman.
I want to add something, or another question. You made statements that, you know, that these variances, some of these variances, the magnitude is very large. And just looking at the parking and also considering item K we just talked about in the master plan, the parking is internalized here. It's in a garage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're allowed to, or we should consider, given its proximity to public transportation across the street, plus there's buses on the other side on Main Street, we're allowed to consider, or we should consider, I think, alternative parking standards. So I don't, to me, while it would be nice to have a couple more spots perhaps, but every resident in here, every unit in here has its own dedicated parking. So I don't know how you could really say that that's a significant problem. Do you think it's a significant problem?
I'm going by the magnitude of the deviation. It's 1/2 of the required amount. But if the board sees it differently, you see it differently.
Are you saying we're not allowed to, or we shouldn't be able to use an alternative standard based on the location of the property? I'm trying to reconcile what you're saying versus what we've heard for months.
Making no such assertion that you don't have the freedom to issue a decision with a lesser parking ratio than 1-to-1. That's certainly your prerogative. I'm saying that in the variance and relief world, this jumps out as something that's discordant with what's required.
Do you think that rises to the level of being a significant detriment to the public good?
On its own, no, but bundled with all the others that are much more substantial than this, yes.
Okay, all right. I'm just trying to get a framework around all of this. You
Mhm.
understand, right? Okay, so, Mr. Stern, did you have anything else you wanted to add in terms of your perspectives on all this? We've got a memo from the applicant's planner, which details all those their various analysis. We've heard this analysis. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, before Mr. Stern testifies, might I just ask just a few questions?
Of course, of course.
Perhaps people in the public have questions and then we can have the board testimony. Does that make sense?
That's fine.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Pesolano, I heard you say you don't represent any municipalities any longer, and I understand you do a lot of objector work. Did I understand you to say that it's good planning to defeat this application to preserve commercial opportunities for possible future unknown uses?
Not in those exact words, but the commercial potential is a rare item in the CBD1 in my perception. And so that's why I'm recommending that it not be thrown away for just having a few more residential units that could be readily accommodated where the zone plan wants them to be.
You referred to the only two variances that relate directly to the building size, the rear yard setback and the maximum impervious coverage, and you cited a 1.1 setback in the rear yard. Don't think I heard you reference the fact that a substantial portion of the rear yard is from 13 feet 5 inches to 18 feet 3 inches. Did you review the plan?
I saw the plan. You're talking about the trash enclosure area, right?
You were talking about the trash enclosure area. I was talking about the substantial span that is a much more significant setback.
I prefaced what I was saying about that by saying the most impactful part of the setback deficiency is the 47 linear feet that is a straight line from the access easement going north or northwest, I guess.
Do you think
it's the zigzag of the trash enclosure part.
Do you think on-site parking in a developed downtown area is a positive?
Sure.
You expressed great concern on the impacts of this project on the adjacent property owners. Are you aware that the adjacent property owners signed on to the application?
Yes, I heard that earlier on.
You're aware of the improvements that the applicant has been working with those neighbors as well as the board professionals to impart on historic conditions?
I'm not, let's go back to the prior thing. I'm not so sure that the occupants of that 8-unit structure have any idea what's about to happen. They may be renters and not entitled to notification. I don't know.
Right. Well, I was referring to the property owners. I don't know whether the property owners, and nor do you, what communication they had with their tenants.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the historic preservation piece, you had some hyperbole relative to the decimation of any historic record of this building. Did you review at all the record of the 6 public hearings, 2 informal hearings, the resolutions and the certificates of review from the Historic Preservation Commission?
I am aware of the history of that. I made my remarks in the context of its departure from what the zoning vision is for the downtown, which incorporates preservation of historic structures. It is what it is. I'm just reading it out of the book, basically, that's what this district wants to see.
Well, I appreciate the academic approach to this application. Are you aware that chandeliers, ticket booths, a important stone plaque are being preserved as part of the demolition and the new construction?
I did hear that, yes.
And that the applicant hiring a historic architect and working with the professionals for the Historic Preservation Commission came up with various plaques that will preserve the legacy of this building that was found to be dilapidated?
Yes.
Did I hear you say that you reject transit-oriented mixed-use development as a positive?
Not at all. When did I say any such thing?
I must have misheard you. I'm sorry. And finally, would your position deprive Madison of an entirely new group of residents in these 24 units that would support the existing businesses and restaurants downtown?
No good land sits idle for long, Mr. Wolfson. It would not be my doing. The marketplace will work to provide what the highest and best thing is there. I have faith in that.
So you advocate a market approach to planning as opposed to the academic one you
I'm
spoke
saying
about?
that's what will take place. And certainly there's a regulatory framework to guide it, as we're doing now, but it won't sit idle due to lack of interest, is what I'm saying.
Okay, I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so I think we should probably go to the public for any questions of the objective planner. Michael?
Yes, there is one.
Okay, so who would that be?
David Steckety, please unmute.
Okay, you're gonna need to introduce yourself and give us your address.
Sure, David Steckety, 2 Ferndale Road, Madison.
Okay, so questions for the planner, please?
Am I allowed to make a statement as opposed to a question?
No, not at this point. This is question.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
So he's gone? Is that it? Okay.
There's one more, Dot.
Okay, Dot, please introduce yourself and tell us your address.
Dot O'Brien, 38 Crestwood Drive, Madison.
Okay, so any questions for Mr. Pesolano?
Well, my question is actually to Mr. Phillips in relation to Mr. Pesolano's testimony.
All right, so a planning question, go ahead.
Okay. So Mr. Phillips, in relation to Mr. Pesolano's testimony, concerning your study for what would be viable in the space, did you do in fact any studies to assuming that the variances would not be approved for setbacks and the square footage, length and width wise of the building? In other words, if I recall your testimony from the prior meeting, it was based on just a 230 feet deep units on business units only.
If I understand the question correctly, I testified as to the amount of ground floor commercial space that would have to be available. And I think I estimated a figure of about 9,000 square feet that would have to be leased, marketed and leased in the downtown. And I also compared the amount of space proposed as well as, I guess, theoretically the 9,000 square feet with the range of retail spaces that I studied when I did the evaluation of downtown spaces. I'm not sure what you're asking beyond that.
I guess I'm asking that, assuming that, that the variances are not approved to, to give to do away with the setback requirements, which would, stay in ordinance, for the residential units behind the now lot where the theater was. Maybe this question is actually for either planner. I mean, besides, in order to keep the first floor commercial, which is what the variance requires now, and keeps the town from losing a commercial space and the opportunities for business that it would provide, did you study other options other than retail, such as if the back of the building is kept commercial as the variance requires, did you consider other uses other than rental space for office or restaurants, such as storage facilities, and keep did you study the possibility of keeping, if the space can't be rented for offices, that it could be maybe and not for recreation use, which I know you didn't
Yeah,
consider.
I think we understand the question. So any one of the planners want to jump on that?
And just if I might, Mr. Chairman, you'll recall that the cross-examination from the public of Mr. Phillips, other than Mr. Simon, was closed. Obviously, if there's one question, Mr. Phillips will be glad to respond to it.
Okay. Yes.
I did not consider, I think the issue of recreation was asked at the last hearing, but also in addition, I did not consider storage as a use for the ground floor now.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. So,
More Joseph Finelli.
oh, okay. Mr. Finelli, introduce yourself and give us your address. I think you're muted.
Mr. Finelli, you'll need to unmute. There you
Okay, it's Dr. and Mrs. Finley. I've been listening to this evening. Quite an education for me. Lived in this town for over 50 years.
We need a question.
Yeah,
So-
like I'm leading up to my question, so give me a moment, okay? I just would like to know, where do we go from here as a citizen of this town? I heard all the other testimony coming from the other side, and I absorbed it and accepted it. And now I'm hearing this. I'm a little bit confused. Do we go on with the plans as such, or is this going to be revisited in terms of making some different accommodations according to what the rules and regulations as to what should be or shouldn't be?
It's just you're supposed to be asking questions of the
That's the
planner,
question I'm
Mr.
asking. Excuse me, I'm
Mr.
asking a question.
Well, let me jump in quickly, a procedural legal question. Where we go from here is the zoning board will deliberate and decide whether or not to approve the application or not, which is what they're tasked to do under state law.
Okay.
That's the next step. And either they'll approve it or turn it down or something in between. And then the applicant will go to court or build or change or whatever. That's the next step.
Okay, thank you for answering my question.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other hands?
That's all, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so Gary, what do we need to do next? Because we're gonna have to wrap up soon.
Well, it's almost 11. What I would suggest is, and it's kind of late and we're gonna have to deliberate. I would suggest one possibility would be to allow the applicant and the objector to make written submissions. Here's their arguments, written closing statements, which can be considered ahead of time the next meeting by the board, which can then deliberate and vote.
Okay.
And that's one possibility. I don't know, Mr. Simon, Mr. Wolfson, what your reaction, sometimes that procedure is used. You get a,
Do Mr. Simon and Mr. Wilson have to technically wrap up now and then we would?
well, what I'm suggesting is they could wrap up in writing.
Okay.
Rather than ahead of time, so the board will have the opportunity to read their positions prior to deliberating, rather than hearing oral arguments or summations and then right after that deliberating. You can do it either way. I don't know. Boards do either procedure, I think, is used by boards at different times.
Okay.
I just throw that out as a possibility. I don't know.
But if
Mr. Simon, Mr. Wilson, what your reactions are to that.
I'll let Peter go first because he's the applicant.
Okay.
As a courtesy.
The applicant always goes last. Go ahead, Mr.
No,
Simon.
no. I'm not talking about in terms of order. I'm saying in terms of preference.
Yeah.
Whether you have a preference, Peter.
My preference is to push forward. This board has been exceedingly patient throughout many, many sessions. And if they are up to it to try to push to a vote tonight, that's our preference.
Yeah, admittedly, I can go either way. If the board would prefer that we have written submissions so that they have a chance to absorb them prior to deliberating, I'm fine with that. I'm certainly prepared to proceed tonight, if that is the desire of the board. Of course, that would be after public comment. That's up to the board.
Yeah, the other question for the board is whether, assuming there's some even abbreviated closing arguments, whether you're gonna want to then deliberate and decide it tonight or not. I mean, you can.
Well,
Or whether you're gonna say, I want to think about it anyway, and that's the question.
all right, so let me ask another question then. If we went with, under our bylaws and we had, let's say we had, you had prepared a preliminary resolution, right, to be considered. If you were to prepare something like that, and that we would review, and then we would come back and consider that, is that an option for us?
Well, that presumes that you'll give me guidance on what your decision is likely to be, because otherwise, I'm not a fortune teller.
Yeah, I would respectfully oppose that.
Okay.
Only in that I believe that the board should, certainly consider all the, any comment from the public, of
Well, yeah,
course,
you do have to
summations.
public comment. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
and then, right, before any type of deliberation, before giving Gary any direction.
Okay, yeah, okay. So maybe what we should do then is, I don't want to keep us here till midnight doing this, right, tonight.
Oh, I'm 100% in agreement with you on that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Then why don't you open it to the public and then we'll decide after that.
Okay, so if you were saying that we could go to the public for statements tonight?
Yes, and under, as I said, I think at the beginning, under the DCA regulations for public comment, the public is required to be seen by the board members, not just heard.
Okay, very good. We'll go with that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open up, this is a very important part of any application, and that is it provides an opportunity for the public to make a statement either in support or opposition to the application. I'm going to ask that you try and be brief and be respectful of everybody, and we'd be happy to hear your statements. So do we have any hands raised? Michael, you there?
Yep. All right. Dot will be promoted to a panelist to turn their video on.
Dot, you're
Dot, you're muted and we have to see you. Sorry. And because there may be testimony, I need to swear you in. So if you'd raise your right hand, you solemnly swear any testimony you may give will be the truth.
Yes.
Thank you. And tell us again who you are, if you would.
Dorothy O'Brien, 38 Crestwood Drive.
Thank you.
Yeah, as a member of the public, I don't support many of the variances that the plaintiff is requesting. I don't support the request for doing away with the setback in the back of the building. I don't support they're doing the variance for getting rid of the plant requirements. I also have concerns about the height of the building. And I think the plaintiff, the planner, plaintiff, Mr. Pasolano made a really good point concerning that once the commercial space is given away, it's gone. You know, the building that was there was 100 years old. It could be another 100 years before the building that goes up in its place, you know, something happens to that. And I think that when you consider that what the plaintiff is requesting to put 2 apartments on the first floor, which is a major variance in the downtown area. What is that really going to bring to the town as far as, you know, foot traffic for the other businesses in town, or even business for the other businesses in town? You're talking 2 apartments, so maybe 2 adults are going to be moving into that first floor that you're going to give this variance away for?
24 apartments.
I'm talking about the 2 apartments on the first floor, the variance they're requesting. I don't care about the apartments above it.
No, there's
other
6 on the
variance.
first floor.
Yes, the 2
6, not
apartments.
2. Okay.
Yes, 2 apartments on the first floor, which is a major variance in the downtown area, which is going to bring 2 adults at minimum, maybe max 4 adults and some kids. I don't see the purchase power that two adults or 2 families are going to have that are going to offset the variance and the giveaway of commercial space that could be, as Mr. Passamano said, we don't know what.
There's 6 units on the bottom floor for residential.
6 units?
There's 2 retail, 1 or 2 retail, and then 6 residential.
And 3 of those are affordable units.
Thank you.
Okay, well, there's no reason that the affordable units couldn't be put in the on the 2nd or 3rd floor. I mean, the developer clearly thinks that the building is going to be profitable, that they took the risk of knocking the building down before getting variances that seem very confident that they're going to make money one way or the other, whether they get the variances or not. And if they knocked it down with the idea that, now they have to be given their variances, I don't think that should be rewarded. If they are assuming that the building's going to be profitable, with or without variances, then hold them to the standards in the downtown and don't give them these extraordinary variances. You're talking about building a very large building in place of the Madison Theater.
All right, so you're getting a little repetitive. So is there anything else you want to bring up?
I also have concerns concerning that utility room, the variance for, not putting the meters on the outside of the building as it's required. Now, the tenants are tenants, and if they move out, the town cannot put a lien on them to get paid back if they don't pay their utilities. That cost is going to be offset by us, the owners, the businesses and property owners in town, who are going to have to ultimately will be paying the costs for scofflaws that rent and don't pay their utility bills. And I think that's also a major variance that the building should be given. The Madison DPW, electric and water, they need easy access to the meter so that they can turn service on and off if payment is not being paid, right away.
I think you brought this up at a previous time. Is there any other topic you wanted to mention in your statement?
No, that's it for me.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other hands up?
Yes, we do. Joseph Finelli, once again, will be promoted to a panelist.
Okay, please again, give us your name again and your address. You're muted, I think, right? Oh, where are
They're not even there.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
They're unmuted. It looks like they're speaking.
Well, I can't see them.
It shows being muted, now unmuted, but no video.
For the finales, you're going to need to unmute as well as get your video going.
Yeah, it looks like they're speaking.
We can't see them though.
It's Finley.
Oh, there we go. Now they're speaking, but it says they're muted.
We need a video. All right, why don't we, is there any other hands? Because we can come back to them when we work this out.
We'll just mute them here. Christopher?
There we go.
Mine is easy. I just I was assuming we're going to the 21st. I apologize, but I wasn't sure with the residentials. So I don't have a question. I don't have a statement. It was more about our case. I apologize, but I have architects and engineers on the line, so.
Is carried, and why don't you get in touch with Ms. Boardman, and we'll work out what we're going to hear.
Okay, all right, thank you. Good luck with everything. Sorry.
It's okay. Any others? Hands up.
Yes, there is one more. Herm Huber.
Okay. Where is that?
Coming through right now.
Okay, so,
Isn't that another applicant?
Yes, it is another applicant.
hi, you're carried. So we're not gonna hear you tonight, obviously. We never got there.
Well, the problem is that we have a pre-existing travel plans and we will not be in town on the
Well,
21st.
well-
And I don't want to have to renotice everyone.
No, you don't. Then it'll be carried to July 8th.
Okay.
All right.
That's the next subsequent meeting, and you don't have to notice again. We're announcing it now. It's July 8th. Okay.
Thanks for bearing with. Any other hands up?
There is one more, Steve Kellogg.
Okay. So you'll need to introduce yourself and give us your address. When you have a video, when we have the video going.
Oh, there
Hi.
it is.
Good evening. My name is Chris Kellogg. I'm a resident of Madison. I have listened tonight to both the planners testifying.
Wait, I'm sorry. I have to swear you in case you testify. That's
Yep,
the rules.
okay.
Do solemnly swear any testimony you give will be the truth.
I do.
Thank you.
And what's your address?
3 Walnut Street.
Okay.
So I listened with interest to both of the planners this evening, and we heard many good classic discussions about the issues that go into the sort of management of planning in a borough like ours. But I wanted to mention another concern that I've had right from the beginning
Hey,
with
can I-
the project.
Can I interrupt just 1 second?
Uh-huh,
You're Chris Kellogg, right?
correct.
And you're on his HPC, Historic?
Well, yes, I had to recuse, so I'm not on it. I was not on it for this project, and I'm now here as a resident.
But, okay, I want to make sure we don't have a problem, Gary.
No, and I believe he's also Helen Kaar's partner, so that's another wrinkle. But she's accused as well, and I think we can hear him.
Okay, just want to make sure.
But it's good to know those background facts. That's fine.
Yeah, I know the HPC. You heard the HPC application.
Yes, yeah, that was a very lengthy process and very intriguing. At this point, my concern would be with the urban design aspect, which is a little bit of a shift from the urban planning that we heard so much about tonight. Urban design is really where I go as an architect into the world of 3 dimensions, and we talk about the character and the scale and the bulk and the feel of a place that's generated by the buildings or the building, in this case, the single building. So what we have here is we have a street, Lincoln Place, that moves down, not in a straight line, but as you approach the post office, it takes a slight bend. As it takes that bend, a large portion of the theater, which is now gone, is exposed. So you see the original head house for the theater was a 2-story element, and that now because of the curve, when you stand at Waverly Place and look down the street, you saw the full length and width of the 2-story head house. So the architect for the new project has proposed that now be 4 stories. So when you stand, and you can look at the renderings and see this, but it's not as evident if you're actually standing at Waverly Place. You look down and from Waverly, look down Lincoln, you will see now a 4-story block. That is one concern that has been dominant for me from the beginning, is that this building is not a bad building. It's just the wrong building for the wrong place, or the wrong building in the wrong place. So I really feel like the building could be substantially improved. It's almost a kind of contemptuous effort that was made on the last design effort, because the building was taken from essentially a 3-story building. They pushed it up into 4 stories to get these alleged little lofty things. And so now we have a 4-story building, at least in all appearances, and perhaps even legally a 4-story building. If that had been pulled down to 3 stories, we would have lessened the bulk, and you'd still have the same unit count. So I don't see why that isn't possible. At least give us that much. But the other thing that's really sad is that this central location directly opposite to the train station is not given a little more credit, not given a little more space. If we had pulled the building back a bit and provided a little bit of a public space in front of the building, then maybe even the 4 stories could have been something that would have been negotiated. But there was no negotiating here. This was all push, maximize unit count. And I feel like it's a shame, and it's really sad that we're not listening and working together as a community, as opposed to being hustled down this route to maximizing the building and getting what will be the single biggest building in the historic district. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other hands raised?
There is not now, but we should see if Joseph Finelli can
Well, now we can see him, somebody.
He's muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, I wanted
Wait,
to.
real quick, let me swear you in real quick, just in case you
yes.
testify. Do you solemnly swear any testimony you give will be the truth?
Yes, it's only my opinion. Yeah,
Okay,
but
that's fine.
What's your address? What's your address?
I just wanted to say that I feel the same way about the 4 stories, that it just becomes an eyesore and is overwhelming, and it doesn't go along with the architecture of the community at all. Thank you.
What's your address?
1 Pomeroy Road, Madison, New Jersey.
Thank you very much. Okay, so do we have any additional hands up?
There are none.
Okay. All right, so we're going to close that public portion. Okay, so I'm going to move to adjourn. So when we come back, what do we need to do, Gary?
Hear closing statements from the 2 attorneys and deliberate and potentially vote.
Okay.
And remember, we only have 7 eligible members, so 7 people that are on the panel right now. So I guess the first question is scheduling.
So that's July 8th.
Can everyone make July 8th? The members of the board?
Yes.
Hopefully. Mary Sue's looking quizzical.
What about that idea of having wrap up statements ahead of time for us to review and think?
Well,
about?
I threw that out. I mean, yeah, that's a possibility. I still need to deliberate whether you do that or not. I mean, otherwise you're
Certainly.
going to hear oral closing arguments that you're going to have to digest and then deliberate. It's up to you.
I'm on vacation. I'm away on the 8th. I have travel
Okay.
plans.
How
Sorry.
about June 21 then?
Same. I'm
Same.
away.
Well, and I don't know what to tell people, because they need 5 votes, and if you have 6, they still need 5. I mean, 7 or 5, you need 7 or 6, you need 5 votes. So I throw that out. I don't know, Mr. Wolfson. I think the board in the past has, in questionable situations, has polled the board. And if it wasn't clear that the outcome with the less than full board, the board has not required a vote. I mean, Joe, you can jump in. I mean, that's tends to be the practice.
I mean, Mr. Chairman, my statement will be 5 minutes or less.
No, we're back to the number of eligible vote. Oh, you're talking about tonight.
Yep.
Okay, well, that's.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm just as a courtesy to the board and to the applicant. I have conflicts on both the 21st. I'm a board attorney in another town. I think we have 6 applications that night, and I'm going to be away on July 8th.
Respectfully, it's not a courtesy to the applicant or, in my opinion, the board. I'll be away on July 8th, but I'll send somebody else from my firm to be there.
We want to wrap this. We're not going into July, August,
Well, you can hear closing arguments and vote tonight if you want. It's 10 after 11.
Maybe we have to do that. So why don't we go to closing arguments and we'll deliberate and vote now?
Okay.
Is the board okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the board's okay with that?
I
So-
actually was looking for an opportunity to go back over some transcripts and have some better thoughts put together. I don't know if anybody else feels that way. If the masses are not aligned with that, then we'll move on.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd agree. I do think that there's some real deliberation to be had here. And it's probably not going to happen tonight in a meaningful way. And I think that people inherently will, go with whatever option is less thoughtful and leaves more flexibility given where we're at in the day and this process. And I don't think that's the best for the applicant either.
Yeah,
We understand that, and we will make ourselves available whenever the 7 board members eligible for this can make it.
Well, why don't we try to find another date that we, all 7 can be here?
Let's do that.
how about July 20, the fourth Thursday in July?
I'm away.
That's the problem when you get into the summer.
That's what we're trying to avoid here.
That's what we tried to beat the clock.
Or let's pick some other dates.
We do have, is Fran, oh, Fran, you're still here. What, historically, what dates have been, we haven't had many dates. Seems like there were a couple Thursdays and Mondays.
Does the 17th work, next Thursday?
It works for me.
I'm not here. I'm away, sorry.
No.
Okay, pick
What
another
was
date.
the Monday? Oh, the Monday date was the 21st. That was, somebody had a problem there.
Can we pick a different, a date other than a Monday or a Thursday? I mean,
Fran, you tell me. That's just my recollection in the past.
this is really important. We got to get this done.
What about June 29th,
What day of the week is that?
the Tuesday?
That would work.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have a conflict that night, but at this point, maybe the board does not need me.
Well, you're not voting, Russell.
Yeah. We could proceed anyways. It's the 29th, it's June 29, we said, right? Is there,
Yes.
are the voting members available the 29th?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so everybody else is available? Okay, so we're gonna make a motion to have a special meeting on the 29th of June. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we've just established a special meeting for the 29th of June. And we're gonna hear any closing arguments, go to deliberation and go to a vote. Is everybody in agreement with that?
Yes.
Everybody's satisfied with that? So give everybody plenty of time to read all the transcripts that have occurred, look at all the materials, weigh all the arguments, and be ready to articulate a position.
Mr. Chairman, that's at 7:30, continuing on Zoom,
That's correct.
and we will make our arguments orally that evening.
Oral arguments on the 29th of June at 7:30. And anything else anybody needs to bring up? Gary, everything's squared away?
I think that covers it. If you want to do it orally, that's fine. That's your choice. And other than to request the attorneys to try to be brief, but I understand.
Mr. Wolfson, there's still the transcript from May 13th that's outstanding. And then this evening's. Is there any way that we can expedite these so that the board members can have them before the 29th?
Well, we'll make that request of our court reporter.
Okay.
Yeah, I think tonight's transcript would be very important.
Yes, it will be very long, but we'll request that it be done on an expedited basis.
And I think it was recorded here tonight. I was getting.
Yes, we have her here.
No, I mean, there's a recording too. I know it popped up on my screen that this meeting
Yeah.
was being recorded.
The Zoom meeting, yes.
So there's that option too. Somebody wants to sit down and
we
run
can
at 1.5 speed.
Make the recording available to all of the voting members tomorrow. I'll send them an email to download it. So they can review it.
But Michael, that's on a audio recording. Is that what it is? Our video recording?
Video, audio, and Zoom enabled transcript.
Oh, with Zoom enabled transcript, because I think that's how accurate do those things have turned out to be? I've never looked at one.
Much. Appreciate your time.
I'm sorry, Peter, what?
Said, thank you very much. We appreciate all
Oh,
your
okay,
time.
anyway. All right, I guess that's as far as we can go.
Yes, absolutely. So, all right, so can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Second.
Okay, this meeting's officially adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Aye.
Mr. Wilson, I just want to make, Mr. Wilson, I want to make sure you do want it, you do want it expedited?
Yeah, we'll call you tomorrow.
Yeah, I just figured that, but just because they mentioned recording, I want to make sure you still, yeah, be in touch with Michelle. That's fine. Thank you.
Very much. Thanks, Diane.
Thanks, no problem.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.